at 7 p.m. The council meeting of the 3rd of July 2018. Evacuation procedures. In the event of an emergency, the building may be evacuated. You will be required to vacate the building by the rear entrance and gather at the breezeway between the library and the art gallery buildings. This is council's designated emergency muster point. Circumstances is anyone permitted to re-enter the building until the all clear has been given and the area deemed safe by authorised personnel. In the event of an evacuation, a member of council staff will assist any member of the public with a disability to vacate the building. So we'll move to item 1.1. We have a number of apologies for absence. Councillor Taylor, Hamling, Munro. Yes. Thank you. Seconded?
Second the apology.
Thank you, Councillor Nugent. And all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. 1.2, live streaming and recording. This council meeting is being live streamed and recorded. By speaking at a council meeting, you agree to be live streamed and recorded. Please ensure that if and when you speak at this council meeting, that you ensure you are respectful to others and use appropriate language at all times. Orange City Council accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. A recording will be made for administrative purposes and will be available to councillors. Acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people who are the traditional custodians of the land. I would like to pay my respects to elders, both past and present, of the Wiradjuri nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginal Australians who are present. 1.4, declarations of interest. Any councillor wish to declare any conflict of interest in any matter for consideration at the council meeting? Councillor Duffy.
Chair, I have a declaration of interest as 6.2, I think it is. But I'm in.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Are there any others? Thank you. We move on to item 2, mayoral minutes. There are none. However, I would like to make note of the Youth of the Month, Jake Clark. Jake is a St John's Ambulance cadet. He's a member of the Youth Action Council, and some of us might remember there was a lady who collapsed at our Centrelink office a while back. Jake was one of the bystanders who stepped up, showed some leadership, and he and Laurie Mullins performed CPR on this lady and saved her life. So Jake is our Youth of the Month, and I think it's nice to acknowledge not only in the little ceremony we have here at Councils on a Thursday afternoon, but acknowledge Jake at today's meeting. So congratulations to Jake Clark as Youth of the Month, and we hope to see his continued leadership in our community. We'll now we'll adjourn the council meeting for the conduct of the open forum. We have 3 speakers today and I'll call them in the order that they were submitted. So we have, first of all, Gemma Dwyer, and it's related to the development application DA 305 2016 168 Shirley Road.
I've just got a map that I'd like to give to the Mayor and the General Manager, just that shows an overview of the blocks that I'm discussing, if possible. Would
you like to pass it around each way? It'll get back to the General Manager and I.
Since the inception of the Shirley DCP, we have actively been involved, engaged and interested. In fact, my husband was one of 5 people to attend the very first meeting regarding the Shirley development at its conception. From the beginning, we have raised concerns as to the impositions on our land and how any development is possible if the land required is not owned by the applicant. At every point and stage, we have been told that the Shirley DCP was an overview held by council, but that individual landowners are able to develop their land as they see fit, provided it complies with all the relevant guidelines. Basically, when we raised concerns regarding the access and consent required for this part of the plan in the original Shirley DCP, we were told by council that it would be dealt with when a DA was submitted. The DA was submitted. We again approached council raising our concerns for this application to be approved. We are now being told it will be dealt with at the building stage. Firstly, just because something is in a DCP should not mean that no notification should be given to affected parties. Public interest and submissions need to be dealt with fairly and within the guidelines of the EPNA Act. We feel this has not been the case. The resubmission of this DA came with notification, but council clearly stated it was in no way obliged to notify us or any other neighbours. This is clearly a breach of the intention of 4.1 and an incorrect assessment on behalf of council. I need to point out whose land is marked in the application as having to supply services such as roads, sewerage, water and stormwater. Ours, not the applicant's. How could anyone presume that we do not need to be notified? If this was your land, would you think it was okay to not be notified? By chance, I went to the council yesterday and inquired if there was any progress made regarding this DA. I was told it was going to a council meeting tomorrow night. Why had we not been notified? I was told that a letter drop would be arranged to notify neighbours yesterday. Please note that not all neighbours were notified. Clearly, by receiving so many submissions with regard to this DA shows there is a considerable public interest and notification should have been given to the affected landowners. 4.15 of the EPNA Act states that public interest needs to be considered in all applications. Our dealings with council to date have lacked transparency to say the least. We have been kept in the dark by the council and the developer the whole way through this process. We are starting to wonder if it's deliberate. Secondly, the EPA regulation clearly states in clause 49 who can make development applications. For a DA to be legally submitted, it must have owner's consent. We ask how council is legally able to accept such an application or even make an assessment that approves an application with conditions when the validity of the application is in question. As a directly affected party whose land is required for the approval of sections of this DA, how has it been legally submitted, accepted and assessed? This DA requires our land to supply the very infrastructure that every single piece of legislation that we have read to date stipulates should be owned by the applicant. Neither the owner of this DA nor the council has felt the need to discuss any of these matters with us, which is just a basic lack of common courtesy. Thirdly, this DA dictates where a future road must go on our land. This is unreasonable and unjust. We have the right to develop our land as we see fit within the guidelines stated. This is dictating the future use of our land. We can meet the intention of the DCP on our land in a number of ways. There are already many parts of the Shirley area that have been developed without following the DCP to the letter. For instance, Phillip Shaw Winery, the 2 group homes at the corner of Rifle Range Road. There is a current DA before council along Shirley Road, which has not strictly adhered to the road placement as prescribed in the DCP. Why are these developers allowed to develop their land as they see fit and we are not? If this application is approved, we are put in the unenviable position of having to negotiate directly with the applicant or landowner, which could be costly and result in legal action because this council accepted a DA without landowner's consent, which we understood to be a legal requirement of any development application. This questions whether this DA is legal. We are not unreasonable people, nor are we anti-progress. We just seek fair and just decisions to be made by our council within the boundaries of the law. The council responds in the appropriate manner as required. The EPA and Regs 2000 clearly states in clause 49(1)(b).
Sorry, we just need to pause there. You've come to the allocated time. We have an extension. Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Councillor Nugent. All in favour?
It's the last sentence. The EPA and Regs 2000 clearly states in clause 49(1)(b) that a development application must have in consent have consent in writing of the owner of the land. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Dwyer. Second speaker for the open forum is Gary Coulson regarding subdivision.
Yeah, councillors. I won't go on as long as Jem, but Jem's said most of the things that needed to be said. There's lack of communications with all of this. I didn't get a letter drop. Only reason that I knew anything about this is I've got good neighbours. She sent me a text at 10 o'clock last night, Gary, going to the meeting. I didn't know anything about it. So I've rearranged my schedule to be here. Thank you. My concerns are, I'm concerned regarding a sewer main that goes a metre in my boundary. The proposed sewer main is entering my property, and I want to know what sort of compensation is involved in this. What's my legal rights with this? What's my legal rights? What compensation? And what's the rehabilitation of this? And what's the ongoing with this? If there's a sewage main a metre in my property, which goes through the middle of a shed, digs all the trees out, and if we did have a Councillor Reg Kidd, well, he had the place next door and he's got a parkland garden in that place. What do we do with the trees? A metre in the boundary. I think it's very, very unreasonable. If I was doing a subdivision in Summer Street and I come along and ask council, could I have a metre at Cook Park? I could well imagine what the response would be from council, and you getting the same response from me. What are the legal requirements? How far from the main are we allowed to build? It's going to devalue my property. Why can't they go out on the road? There's a 3-chain road, for goodness sake, and at the end of it all, where they did the sewerage and water pipeline to the government buildings in Rifle Range Road, they were able to put the sewerage and water main in almost the same trench. They dug the same trenches about a metre apart at the same time, simultaneous. So what's this all about? Lack of communications with council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coulson. Our third speaker, Cyril Smith, regarding Lily Place and discharge of stormwater.
Hey, thank you for giving me the chance to speak to council tonight. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the CRC, Water Sensitive Cities, and the cooperation of Orange City Council and Centroc Water Alliance on their production of orange stormwater to potable, building urban water supply diversity. A great production, and I think all councillors should have a copy so they can read. If you don't have a copy, speak to council. Yes, first of all, I'd like to support the comments made by the first two speakers on Shirley development. I also made a submission on that, and I fully appreciate their concerns. So going to the next one, Lot 211 Lily Place and its development. I think most people that submitted submissions on it would agree that it's considered as an overdevelopment, and I'm very concerned with the stormwater that will be generated by the hard surfaces associated with that development. I estimate something like 80 to 90% of the land would be covered by hard surface. I'm also concerned that there is no indication, again, the council have contacted sort of the adjoining property owners to see whether the impacts would affect them at all. In this regard is the stormwater. The stormwater collected from the buildings in this area will be discharged on what I thought was the Orange High agricultural plot. But some people tell me now that the Catholic diocese own a property next door to that block. And so the ownership I'm not certain of at this time. So on the agenda tonight, 7.3, and what I propose is that you as councillors consider deferring this development application until the stormwater dispersal is rectified and dealt with. You can see that in clauses 7.3, 3A, B and C, I don't think have been addressed. One part of that is concerning natural flows. I don't think the natural flows from this area have been determined, and so it's difficult to go back to what would be a natural flow. So I'm very interested in the design features of any on-site detention system and the capacity of that detention system to cater for the expected stormwater that will be generated. The DCP sets out the following planning outcomes, page 142. Provision is made for onset drainage which does not cause damage or nuisance flows to adjoining properties. I would contend that the discharging of the expected stormwater will generate some damage and nuisance to adjoining properties, in particular the one that is either owned by the Department of Education or the Catholic Diocese. I honestly don't feel that condition 14 on page 153 can be met with the current housing density proposed in this DA. I would estimate if we had 10 mils of rainfall today, there would not be any runoff from this development site. But if the development does go ahead, it would generate approximately 50 cubic metres or 50 kilolitres of water to be drained. Now that quantity of water would be equivalent to more than 2 times the volume of your little kitchenette associated with this meeting room. So you ask yourself the question, would you like that amount of water dumped in your backyard? I think not. So again, I'd ask councillors to consider deferring this DA until the stormwater issue is addressed. Thank you.
Mr. Smith. Closes the open forum. We'll resume the council meeting. We'll move to 3.1, confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting.
Move.
Who was that? I wasn't quick enough to look. Thank you, Councillor Romano. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Privatera. All in favour? Against? Carried. So I'll now adjourn the council meeting and move on to the conduct of the policy committees. I invite Planning and Development Chairperson, Councillor Turner, to this hot seat.
Thank you, Councillor McRae. And pleasure to open the Planning Development Committee at about 20 past 7. And 1.1, declarations of pecuniary interest, significant pecuniary interest, etc. Are there any? There being none. General reports 2.1, items approved under the delegated authority of council.
The recommendation
Come from Councillor Whitten and seconded by Councillor Nugent. Any discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favour, against, carried. 2.2, Part 5, Environmental Assessment, Southern Feeder Road, Stage 2.
Happy to move it, Mr Chairman.
It's been moved by Councillor Duffy, seconded by Councillor Romano. Councillor Duffy.
Comment on what I want to actually talk about here is we're looking at it is with Stage 2. Does it include the roundabout on the Edward Street? We're jumping into Stage 2. We're talking about going across the railway line.
Stage 2 doesn't include, but when we build down to the highway, on
to my other further questions too, you can take these ones on from then later on as regards to Stage 3. Are we in the process of doing an assessment on Stage 3 as well?
it might be worthwhile if we publish what all the stages are and where we're up to, because
I remember seeing in the budget processes when I was away, you used to put asterisks alongside things, and these were going to happen if money turned up. And I was under the impression that money had turned up for some of these.
as it's reduced, but there's gap to do from, I don't know, Mitchell Highway, Dairy Creek Road, all the way up to Pinnacle.
My huge concern all the way along this about the Southern Feeder, we don't want to see happen over there what happened at the Northern Distributor station roundabouts to traffic, because
Councillor Duffy. Councillor Nugent.
Just following on from what Councillor Duffy was asking and what the General Manager was saying. In terms of the different stages now, I note on page 12, Stage 3 is likely to occur within the next 10 to 15 years, and I guess that obviously is depending on funding. And we have been funded for $4.6 million towards Stage 4 of the feeder road, so does that mean that Stage 4 is likely to be completed before Stage 3? So I suppose just on notice, if I could, as part of that, publishing stages, and when can we include a likely completion or likely completion dates?
Certainly can.
Yeah, certainly, because we've actually secured some funding through Resources for Regions for Stage 4. That will be advanced. We've got the design is in progress at the moment, and it will likely go out to tender in about 2 to 3 months' time. To progress the start of that, we'll assess the period of time, but I would imagine that partway through 2018 that we will have a completion of Stage 4, which will link Anson Street section of the Southern Feeder Road right through to the Pinnacle Road.
And I guess we're not far short on stage up and over the railway. Don't have bad in terms final stage that goes around to roughly the state of play.
Only that there are grant applications in play at the moment that haven't been realised as yet. See how they fall.
So, that sounds good. Just on the 4.6 million towards Stage 4, I presume that wouldn't cover the
That's a 50% contribution.
50. Sorry, one final question. In terms of the existing Ash Street, I understand that will close when Stage 2 is...
I'd keep our powder dry on that one. We need to see how everything works.
Okay. So
Certainly something that's been.
The traffic.
we'll wait. It's a wait and see.
Well, we just need to get through.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Put the recommendation. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. We move on to 2.3, the expansion of heritage conservation areas. Move the recommendation.
Acknowledge.
Councillor Miletto, seconded by Councillor Nugent. Any discussion?
Chairman,
Councillor Duffy.
This was originally brought up by Councillor Taylor, and when we're talking about the things in Casey Street and those things, which I totally agree with. And I'm not necessarily against what the recommendation is, but I want to know when the review is actually going to happen on the LEP. Not only with this review here with the expansion of the heritage area, but we've also got the issue of the infill policies and all those type of things there. So when is that due, and when is that due to happen? I think 10 years' time, I'll vote against this resolution, but...
Through you, Mr Chair. 2019 is going to be the year under the new changes to the Environmental Planning Act that Council needs to redo its strategic work, which will be top-down, strategic plans, heritage studies, all of those things which will then feed into a new LEP and a DCP.
I'm happy with that answer, but now you've nominated the date in 2019, that means any decisions made in the area that we could think could be covered by will be taken into consideration when the DA comes in.
Through you, Mr Chair, only when we have something in draft. Ideas alone won't work.
Any other comments? All those in favour? Against? Carried. 2.4, development application 168 Shirley Road. Before we go into discussion, I think we might get the two directors to make some comments regarding some of the concerns that have been raised tonight and also in letters we've received.
I can do that, Mr Chair. Just briefly, and we might go back and forth. What our practice is to send a letter out to people who've made submission when the councillors get their business paper. In this case, we got it to those people on Monday. Normally, we would hope to get that on Friday, so we don't have no legislative requirement to get those letters out. But we do apologise for that 1 day's delay. And of course, council can give them more time if they see fit. In terms of owners' consent on land that is not part of this development application, I don't believe that it's true to say it's illegal to lodge a DA if a neighbour has not given consent. In this case, the applicant is wholly in his rights to lodge this DA.
I've got a question there now, Mr Chairman, since we don't have a resolution at the moment and it's question time. This DA application subject to having access to it.
Through you, Mr Chair, there are stages. I was going to say, there are stages in this development. There are stages that the developer, if given consent, can proceed on. But indeed, there are stages where he can't do anything until agreements are made with his neighbours for access.
What if we give approval for the DA and can't give?
Leave the questions until one has moved the recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation.
If you want to keep asking questions, better have someone move
before we get briefed on it, how about we get a motion then, Mr Chairman?
Yep.
I'm quite happy to move
the recommendation, then we can speak.
I don't want to move that recommendation. I'm quite happy to defer the development application until we have
moving that as a motion.
Moving that as a motion until we have a site inspection, and there's 4 councillors away.
So Whitten seconded it.
I'm quite happy to speak for that. There are a hell of a lot of questions not answered, and Councillor Whitten brought up one there with regards to road access and all those type of things. The speaker's brought up a number of issues with regards to where the sewer mains go and all those type of things. So I think we need to make an informed decision on this DA and have a site inspection
We've already had, well, those that could attend have already had that site inspection.
I'm happy to speak.
We have a mover and a seconder for a deferment. Councillor Whitten.
I'll ask my questions, Mr. Chairman. So we're looking to, in the future, if the deferral gets through, give approval for a subdivision that is yet to be negotiated for access from their neighbours.
That parts of, that's correct, Councillor Whitten.
So if their neighbours refuse access to them, they don't have to give access to them. I think we need to inform the relevant neighbours that they are not obliged to sell their land to a developer.
The Director may have pointed that out if he was allowed to finish his talk.
This is my time now, Mr. Chairman. This is in the chamber and it's my turn to ask questions on behalf of the community. So I'm doing that. So I find it very unusual that we would be considering a subdivision that is yet to be to have access to it on parts. Because by and large, and with all due respect to the Director, I understand that there is no obligation to inform neighbours under legislation, but I'm getting pretty tired of coming into this chamber, listening to DA applications for subdivisions and hearing the same story from the community, that we are not taking them with us on DA applications, right? Now, I'll stand corrected. There's two sides to every argument. But this is, and we've sold it to the community, the Shirley concept is a wonderful concept. Need to take people with us when we do this, right? Now, and irrespective of legislation, we are a small community and we need to cooperate with everybody who is affected, because this is not an easy thing. When there are subdivisions going in, suffer a whole lot of different emotions. Sure, most of the old councillors in this room have seen all of this debate before, and once the DAs and once the subdivision goes in, some of that pain goes away. But let's focus on the early pain. Take the pain away in the beginning. Take them with us, that's all I say. Inform them.
Well, no, that was about it. I think it's actually is written in our report quite clearly that those lots are subject to that future thing. I'll pass to the Director on the sewer main issues. There's quite a few people who raised that issue.
Yeah, just in regard to details about access for sewer and access for easements and even access for the road alignment. The subdivision as proposed is generally in line with the DCP, and most of the DCP has been drawn up around the sharing of roads, so that access for subdivision. It does not oblige an owner an owner of adjoining land to ever actually subdivide. They may choose never to subdivide, stay there till, and live out their life on that property without subdividing at all. May be subject to future landowners or future developers. So essentially, the subdivision as proposed is really only for stage, while it goes through from lots 1 through to 17. Lots 7 through to 17 are effectively landlocked and won't be subdivided at this point in time. So, as far as the details for over easements for sewer, generally they are located within the property boundary to give the neighbour the benefit of that. But it's not generally part of the BA condition of consent. It's generally subject to the detailed design, and similar to the existing developer up there, Shirley Road, with owns development. they had to negotiate with Smiths over reasonable access for their land and restitution of their land to their satisfaction, including repair of fences and all that sort of thing. So those are the approval or otherwise of the DA today or tonight would not actually take away any of the neighbours' rights in the future.
Mr Greenham, as you mentioned, that subdivision, DA was approved subject to conditions.
Subject to conditions.
Part of those conditions, the developer negotiated with the adjoining landholders for access.
Access and easements, yes.
I think there's a gentleman here.
Sorry, you can't ask questions. Thank you.
But I think, Mr Chair, I think there was a question about damage from sewer mains from that gentleman and how we'd avoid that.
Certainly, yeah, as part of the getting a subdivision, like a final certificate on the subdivision, they actually have to have sign-off from affected by their works that have been affected by the works. So if there was a say a sewer main going through the front of your property and you weren't satisfied with the restitution or satisfied with the arrangements that you'd made privately with that developer, then you don't sign off. He doesn't get his... What's that?
Order, Mr Chairman. Order, Mr Chairman.
With respect, through the chair, it's not up to that stage. We're looking at a development approval, not detailed design.
Point of order, Mr Chairman.
I think we've tried to explain it, that this is just the first stage of the process. All your concerns can be discussed with the developer, with council, to hopefully reach a resolution somewhere down the track. So this is only just the first stage. Yep. No, I'm sorry. Councillor Duffy.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm quite happy to close the debate and someone has finished, but I just want to raise something with the Director, which I think is probably important. When you look at the map that was provided to us, you're talking about Rifle Range Road area as well. And there is a pre-existing use there to the Orange Sporting and Shooters Australia Association of Australia there. And that also comes with that, not only that, historical significance. That was part of the whole existing thing of the small arms factory that was originally before MCO and whatever was before then. And you look at those type of things that occurred out there in those days. I think we probably need to look at that address there and look at the options for them and what we intend to do about that. That's a very...
Mr Chair, that area is not that close to this DA. I hear what you're saying. We did look at that when we did the Shirley Master Plan, made sure they weren't affected or weren't constricted. So for this DA, though, it's not. I don't think it's a relevant concern.
Councillor Milletto.
Through you, Mr Chair, to the Director, are you able to confirm whether there will be any forced financial impact on the objectors here tonight?
No, I'm not, Mr Chair. Through you, Mr Chair.
Thank you.
Councillor Nugent.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Again, through you to the Director. Just a couple of questions in terms of consultation, and Councillor Witten's made some very good points about bringing the community along with us on this. The Shirley DCP was quite some time ago under the... so, you know, there's been a period of time. There has been development going on up there. But in terms of the consultation process, this DA, were the neighbours informed about the DA being lodged, and they were given the opportunity to make submissions, which they obviously have because there's submissions there. Can I just clarify the process for that?
Yes, they were, and resulting in their written submissions, yes.
And what was the process for that? Was it just an advertisement in the paper or notification to individual landholders?
Okay, so in this case it was an advertised development, which means it went in the newspapers, So the neighbours would have been notified. Now, yeah, and that does trouble me. So I think if you end up deferring that, we'll check our records there. But you know, our procedure is to take a map out and go boom, 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 boom around a development. Say all those people will get letters.
So in terms of the notification to the members of the community about the DA being so that there was a process back there. We're not really sure what it was, but in terms of the notification about the
yeah, Mr. Chair, I am sure what it was. We did send letters.
Okay.
I just wanted to check that all these people got those letters. Okay, so no, I'm just going to ask clarification. We do have a process. I'm going to check that these people got those letters.
Okay, so in terms of the notification that this DA was up for approval at the meeting tonight, the first notification to the members of the community was by letter yesterday morning.
Monday. My staff have told me Monday is when the letters.
In yesterday?
As in yesterday, yes. Normally, we would hope to get those out on Friday.
Friday.
In line with when councillors get their business paid.
And one or two other questions. Lots 1 to 6, we've heard that lots 7 to 17 can't be developed without the cooperation of neighbours because they're landlocked. But that does mean that lots 1 to 6 would be developed.
Yes, Mr.
Could be
Chair.
developed,
Yes.
Now. And without the cooperation of neighbours, how long will the DA were to give it how long will that last?
Okay, Mr. Chair. So you give approval to this DA in its current form. The applicant then has 5 years to action that. Now that might just be as simple as a driveway. Once he's done that driveway, then he's got it in perpetuity. Does nothing within 5 years.
If the developer developed those 6 blocks, lots 1 to 6.
Correct.
That would be then it would
substantial commencement.
And I suppose one other question in terms of the deferral, if we were to defer it tonight, what would be why would we be deferring it? What would be the process from here? Would there be another opportunity for residents to make submissions? There's already been that opportunity. I suppose that's a question in my mind.
Mr. Chair, that would be a matter for the person putting the motion up. What they want. Do they want a simple deferral, or do they want a deferral with a meeting, or a deferral with another letter? Or I'm in your hands.
And so maybe I direct that question to Councillor Duffy, the mover of the motion.
Happy to answer that, Mr. Chairman, and I'll close the debate on this one here. I just want to point a number of comments here. Want the matter to come back to council after we have an inspection and a meeting on site. A lot of questions to be asked. Councillor Whitten had some very good questions. A lot of councillors by the new councillors. I would like to say something that planning matters aren't done on dollars or those type of things. We're not done on profit and loss. Doesn't mean anything at all if it does on planning matters. And as far as I'm concerned, we just put this motion about defer it and let's have a meeting and let's have involved, have all those people involved. The objectives they can address council at a meeting if they so wish. Developer.
Closes the debate. I think we've been around enough, Councillor Muleta.
Oh, look, I've just got a comment if I could make that.
Close the debate, Mr. Chairman.
Question, make it a question.
My comment is that I think we've let down a lot of people here tonight because there was a possibility for all councillors who were advised early last week to attend the site, and that did occur yesterday afternoon, which you'd be well aware of, Mr. Chair, because you were one of the people who attended as well as myself, other councillors. It was a week for councillors to make another arrangement to go out there and look at the site, knowing that this matter was going to be discussed at length. Obviously, a matter which has created a lot of public interest. I would have liked to have thought that, if possible, that anybody who was going to speak here tonight, any of the councillors, that they would have made a substantial effort to be there, or leading up to it, so they could be part of the discussions, not defer it when people have come here.
I'm not going to sit here and be dictated to by another councillor about decisions I'm going to make
He's
in this chamber.
he's just
We move on.
making a comment. Make it brief.
Well, he
Councillor
can
Maletta.
make comment all he likes, but he doesn't pay my rent.
Motion, Mr Chairman.
Chairman, I got a question. On page 38 of this document, clause 19A, suspension of covenants. In there, it states the clause provides covenants, agreements and other instruments which seek, restrict, carry out, develop and do not apply to the following exemptions. Covenants imposed or required by council. Example through you, Mr Chairman, what one of those covenants would they be easements? Would they be roads or access? And council force a covenant onto land they do not own.
Yes,
gentleman.
Sorry, through the chair. Council can enforce covenants for those for both roads and for sewer easements. Generally, it's like in Shirley, council is only responsible for the development of the trunk roads under the Shirley Master Plan, and those trunk roads already have road easements for them. So with those trunk roads, some of them are required to be under the Shirley Master Plan up to 26 metres wide. An example of that would be where the existing road reserve is 20 metres wide, and we would, when those adjoining lots are developed, we would acquire 3 metres either side of the road to increase the road reserve width to the 26 metres. That's the type of thing that would involve. The other type would be for the extension of a trunk sewer rather than a distribution sewer, so different to what's being considered here tonight. But the existing rising main that goes from the low point in Shirley Road up over the ridge and then down to to another pump station in the low point within the Department of Primary Industries land, that trunk main was compulsorily, the easement for that was compulsorily required under just terms.
The Crown. From communities. Yeah.
That's the two different examples.
Yeah. So, Mr Chairman, that is why I'm deferring this. I'm not particularly interested in going and looking at the land. I've been out there hundreds of times and during the process of this, the whole Shirley process. More about, I want an opportunity for us to advise the community that are going to be affected by this DA, that they are informed enough. I hope that answers Councillor Miletto's question, because they've raised concerns in this room tonight, and they're relevant concerns, and we need to understand that we have followed process. I'm sure staff have, but these people have come out in the cold tonight to raise issues we need to address. Just courtesy, common courtesy, Mr. Chairman.
I'll close the debate. You're aware that this is an amendment for deferral, or the motion, it's only one motion. The motion is for deferral. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. Next item, 2.5, development application 211 Lily Place.
The instrument of approval.
By Councillor Whitten, seconded by Councillor Duffy. Councillor Miletto.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I just have some concerns with regards to this development application. There's just a couple of questions to the Director, if possible, please. Obviously my first concern is regarding the density of the amount of houses which are going to put on this block, 15. How big is the block? Sorry, just...
Sorry, what was the question?
Overall,
how big is the block?
Oh, we've got a lot size, 15 dwelling houses. Pardon me, Mr Chair.
If you look on page 171,
Thank you.
What page number was that?
page number 171.
And are you able to tell me how many
5,200.
houses are on the block next door to the left of this one?
And off the top of my head, Mr. Chair.
My understanding, they're a similar block size.
12, if I were to guess, Mr. Chair.
Some of my concerns are the very limited green space which accompanies both of these developments. I know we're only speaking about the second one here tonight, but when you drive into Lily Place, it's only a small cul-de-sac. Seems to be limited green space in that area. It's one of my questions to the Director. When you look at the density of these houses, has there been any fire risk assessment undertaken regarding the proposed development? Because there seems to be a lot of houses in a very small area. Second question is, has a traffic feasibility study been undertaken? I have serious concerns with regards to the lack of parking visitors, such a small cul-de-sac, when we've seemed to have asking to approve a development, very small cul-de-sac. I mean, where are these people expected to park it, and how's that going to impact on the people who don't live in that congested space?
Through Mr. Chair, the fire issue will be dealt with, should you approve it, after the subdivision stage, during the stage by the private certifier usually. The issue of parking, Mr. Greenham, did you want to comment on the road design? The parking itself complies, although complying is not everything. I agree that it will be a pretty...
Yeah, just through the chair and in line with David's comments, there are visitor parking spots set aside within the proposed development. There, while very light form on page 173, there's a plan as those visitor parking. I believe it has been assessed and complies with the requirements. Parking.
Thank you. Obviously, particular aims of the Orange LEP 2011 relevant to this proposal are that to encourage development which complements and enhances the unique character of Orange as a major regional centre, boasting a diverse economy and offering an attractive regional lifestyle. Quite sure whether this development fits that. I mean, obviously it's diverse, but I'm not sure whether it enhances the attractive regional lifestyle of Orange. I will be speaking against. I'm not for the development.
Councillor Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. I share some of Councillor Melito's concerns about this development in terms of entity, in terms of the number of houses, dwellings, space. I understand that not everyone wants backyard, and that we need to provide as a council a variety of housing options for people, and this is one option. But I would imagine that taking a couple of the houses out of this development and having a couple less might actually enhance the value and the attractiveness of this development. But then I'm not the developer. So, but you heard from Mr. Smith earlier on in terms of this development, his concerns about the stormwater management on the site and the water discharge, and suggesting that this item be deferred until those issues are. I see on page 126 under stormwater management, item 7.3, that Council's development engineer has recommended conditions requiring stormwater detention within the development. I think Mr. Smith referred to that as condition 15, saying that he wasn't sure that would be required. So I suppose, can I just ask for some reassurance in terms of the stormwater management on the site and how it will be managed and where that stormwater.
Absolutely. Through the chair, it's always good to check on the stormwater requirements. What the development engineer on page 126 has suggested is to limit those 1 in 100 year flows post development to pre-development flows as part of the condition of consent. That condition in condition 14 has flowed through and is consistent with other unit developments within council's area or industrial developments within council's area where for some of the industrial developments 100% of the land is actually hard stand area, and generally most of those hard stand areas are exactly where you provide that detention that's in the car park area and that sort of thing. In some very rare cases, you would look at, sometimes they look at the lower lots in the proposed development and look at the in the backyards of those lower lots. In other cases, you may even consider an underground tank, although there's some maintenance issues for the body corporate in regards to having a below ground stormwater detention tank. So from that perspective, that detail doesn't come out until the construction certificate. It just simply sits as a condition of the proposed development application approval.
McRae?
I'd like to speak for this recommendation. Having heard particularly the detail regarding the stormwater adequacy, and there is planning there to ensure that there isn't nuisance and inconvenience. It's interesting to think that we do have a plan where your backyard will flood as part of stormwater mitigation.
Not in all cases.
Not in all cases, but I'm sure for the people who end up purchasing those, they'd want to know about that beforehand. But that's beyond our remit. What I do speak to, and Councillor Miletto has raised some good questions regarding what we might like to see in developments. However, I guess the principle of smaller homes, smaller blocks will have a lower price. And I think in terms of housing affordability, this type of development in an area which already has a lot of this type of development provides a consistent approach to actually meeting the needs of a variety of our residents and potential residents in providing suitable homes. So I'm for the development for those reasons.
The other speakers? Councillor
Suppose,
Whitman?
Mr Chairman, I'm speaking for it as the mover. It applies with this type of dwelling seem to have a market because they don't last long, and the developer wouldn't be building them if he can't sell them. And I suppose with regard to the stormwater, the key point from the director is that it's been done by an engineer, a civil engineer. With all due respect to the speaker earlier, I'm not sure of his qualifications. He may be a civil engineer. But we have to take on board the council staff who have well, I should clarify that. The gentleman who is the recommended and done the design for the stormwater flows and everything like that. I've heard the word engineer, so I'm happy with that explanation.
Thank you. And if I might just comment for those of us that visited the site yesterday or have visited on other occasions, you will realise that next door there is already a subdivision of a small number of small blocks, and then on the other side of the transmission line that has an easement right through next to this proposed development, there are also a number of small blocks, and as Councillor Whitten has said, if there was not a market for them, the developers would not build them, and they sell quite quickly, as in other infill developments all through out Orange, which have similar size small blocks. So with no further speakers, you will note you did get an amended sheet there, which we would need to approve that as an amended application. So if it's with the approval of the council, that this would be the amended development application, which would include this addendum that we received.
Just takes the place like normal as other conditions, yeah.
Councillor Nugent?
Yeah, just another question. this is a staged development. There's 5 stages, I believe, and
Yes.
if we give approval tonight, we're giving approval to all 5 stages.
Yep, that's my understanding, yes.
Although presumably the developer could come back and amendments to the development application further down the track.
Reasonably normal practice, yes.
And sorry, just another question on the changes. So it's in relation to, I haven't really had a chance to have a look at this, but it's in relation to the bins and the placement of the bins collection. My understanding is that it's that the or resource recovery truck, I'm not sure, but dump truck. It will park on the road, and there'll be a runner going in and bringing the bins out. Is that
My understanding, yes.
that is correct? Okay, thank you.
And that extra cost is negotiated between the, yes.
That's not on the ratepayers. That's
No further discussion. I'll put the motion for approval. All those in favour? Show of hands. Those against? Motion is carried. And as business arising, Mr Waddell, for those that did visit the site, we noticed underneath the transmission line, which I understand council has responsibility for, there's quite a bit of building construction and other rubbish. Can we get an assurance that before they get occupation, that transmission line underneath would be cleared and in a suitable condition?
Mr Chair, we'll relate that to both of those builders. The one across the way is also still building, so yes, we can do that.
Okay. Thank you. That ends the Planning and Development Committee meeting, and I'll call on Councillor Whitten to conduct the Employment and Economic Development.
One's not even worth walking up to the front. Good exercise.
The exercise.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. I'll open the Employment and Economic Development Policy Committee meeting at 4 minutes past 8. Item 1.1, declarations of pecuniary interest, significant non-pecuniary interest and less than significant non-pecuniary interest. Does anyone have any of those? Being none, I'll move on to item 2, General Reports 2.1, Australian Local Government Women's Association Conference bids. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Look, this recommendation I support, that we acknowledge the report on the Australian Local Government Women's Association bids. I don't know if I should have declared an interest as I'm a woman in local government, but my questions related to this, and I accept that it sounds like this conference is not a good fit for Orange at this time, but whether we have any idea of perhaps the conferences Orange is hosting in the next, say, months or so. And the second question is where there's the intent, and I believe it's on page 8, the final point says there's other potential options available to the council to promote women in local government, and I think that should include not only potential councillors but also staff, of which we perhaps don't have a lot of particularly senior staff are women, and if we look around the room at the moment, I would wonder what some of those strategies might be, if indeed we do have any of that information at the moment.
I'd probably take both of those on notice if I could. Certainly the conferences, we've got a number that we're pursuing. All right, apparently Mark can answer that, so I'm very happy with that.
We've got about 18 events coming up over the next 12 months, which have been scheduled, which about 5 are conferences coming in from outside the... We have the Regional Tourism Awards in July, the Planning Institute of Australia Town Planners New South Wales State Conference in September, South Wales Tidy Towns Award in November, South Wales ACT Regional Achievement and Community Awards in November, Water Industry Operators Association Conference. That event, those events, so Operators Councillors know a range of other events such as the New Residents, as you know, we have one events officer who's all that activity. part of consideration in education. Got a series of commitments over the next year. Time and commitment is probably, in terms of what the other options are for promoting women, the EEO management plan will be reviewed in September this year, and in highlighting 3 priorities. One is Indigenous employment, development of women in council workforce. 3 is development of programs for cultural diversity within the organisation.
Thank you. That's a very thorough answer. Thank you.
And I suppose, and I'll get to you in a moment, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor.
Just to answer Councillor McRae, a lot of, during the last council, during this particular committee, it was raised many times, especially by the General Manager at Services, that there is a lot of potential to bring events, especially from the health sector, to Orange, but at the moment we don't seem to have a big enough place to 5,000 people that they would bring. Certainly Orange Services Club came and did a presentation and said that that's on their roadmap. Certainly it's probably something that Vineyard and that might want to consider as well, because in the Hunter there are a number of those large event style places where the rooms and the speaking areas and everything are all hosted in one place, and they can cater for up to 5,000 or 6,000 people at a time. Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I have some concerns about this. I know that the recommendation is that Council acknowledge the report, but in the report it effectively says, I read it.
It's emotional.
This is too hard to. It's not. The benefits don't sort of justify the costs and the risks to Council and the workload on Council to do this. However, at the last council election, the issue of women representation on this council was a hot topic of debate, given that it was an all-male council previously. Now have one woman on council, and who I note has spoken in favour of the recommendation, which is great and to be guided by Councillor McRae. But my concern is about what signal it sends to the community if we're saying, yes, we want greater representation of women in council, in senior roles, as councillors themselves, and then we're saying, well, it's too hard and too risky to bid for this particular. So, I mean, I'd like to see if we're going to decide on this recommendation to just adopt the recommendation as is, that there's some sort of communication strategy to say, much summing up what Mr. Burdak has said, these are the other things that are happening. I note about the EIO, which is great, and that affects in terms of what council staff and staffing. But does that also apply to? Not. I think we've got great representation of women on community. I'd like to see that story told. So if we are going to approve this, I would like maybe to move an amendment that that council is a communication strategy about what council is doing to promote.
Could I suggest a way forward? With your leave, certainly, I would note this, because I think it's in line with what Councillor McRae was saying, that this is pretty well, they've got their schedule for the next 20 years or so, right? What other events are similar like this that we could take, and do it as a matter of arising rather than an amendment to this, because this is really an information document that we're just going to note. Then you do a matter arising, and have our committee, have this committee investigate other events that showcase the reasons why everyone should put their name up to run for council.
Very, very
well. Are you happy with that, Councillor Nugent?
I'm happy to do that as a matter arising. I did have one other question. The Next, is the next opportunity when we could host it in 2022? Like that is, it's already been sort of allocated up until 2020. Shell Harbour is 2020, and it alternates between city and country. The next country one is 2022 when there's no one. So is that the next time when we could potentially? So when would we have to put in a bid to host that conference in 2022? Is there a deadline? Is there a time frame?
Basically, we get in, through you, Mr Chair, the 2-year period to get that through. So we have to prepare the bid, take it along to the next conference. We have to present a competing bid with other other regions, secure the bid. So there's a big expense and a lot of work associated with that. Note in the submission, there's a significant number of things we have to be able to confirm that. And then if we secure the bid, we then need to do the work to...
When would that bid be presented?
Very good question.
Well, can I ask that on as a question on notice, as well as raising that as a matter arising?
Sure.
To Horizon 1?
Yeah, we're going.
Okay. All right.
So we don't have a seconder for the noting. I'll second the noting of this particular document. I suppose the spirit of what we're trying to do is to highlight those to women in the community, Orange community, their interest in becoming local government, and certainly at the end of the day, that comes. Who actually ends up on council is chosen by those who vote for us. But certainly there might be an opportunity for us to have our own event, highlight to people locally, women locally, what's involved in local government. We don't really need to get involved in this big one. This is a big one. And I suppose we just want to look after our own backyard and highlight it to those in the local government in our own community. And it's all about getting them involved in committees, getting them involved in, dare I say it, political parties having them in high up on the tickets, and all about profile. So there's a whole bunch of other things involved in getting on local government or getting in any form of government. But this is the start, we're talking about it. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. You have a matter arising, Councillor Nugent, that you'd like to raise?
I thought I had, but do you need any more?
I just thought I'd let you do it officially, yeah?
Can I?
You'd like to
matter
move
arising,
a motion?
if I can ask for that a communication strategy be prepared in relation to this decision, and what else is in the pipeline in terms of promoting events coming to Orange, because one of the things that this motion was about, this report was about, but also what we're doing to promote women in local government.
I'll second that, as long as you let me put an option in.
Is it a motion?
You have to move a motion, yeah.
As a matter of right?
If you want if you want staff to do something for you, they need a motion. If these guys won't do anything unless there's something on the books.
Okay, well, can I raise the motion then? Thank you.
The motion is what you've just said. I'll second it with the caveat that we look at options of hosting something ourselves, right?
I'd like to make an amendment, and I think that rather than just include women in local government, I think it needs to be more inclusive of diversity, which is our Indigenous engagement, as also cultural diversity and people with disabilities. So I think a broader diversity inclusion would be great. So not just the women, everybody.
Happy to add that, Councillor Nugent?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I need an amendment. We'll just... Everyone understand the motion?
No, can we read it out?
Weren't you listening?
I want to read it out because, Mr.
Read the
Chairman,
motion out really slowly for Councillor Duff.
I want to make a comment because I want to see the encouragement of anyone to come on council and the processes they have to come on to council, whether they're male, female, woman or monkey or whatever you want to call them. Doesn't matter. I would like to think whoever's in the chamber is here because they're a good councillor. I wouldn't like to go up to Forbes and tell Phyllis Miller that she's only on there because she's a woman, or Daria Thurley at Broken Hill because she's there because she's a woman. They're there because they're good councillors.
Are they there because the electorate voted them in? That's what the people have got to understand. We don't pick people. The community do. They get voted in. So they've got to understand that bit first and foremost, right?
I'm going to argue with him.
So we have a motion. The gentleman is going to read it out just for you.
So that we bring forward a report identifying coming events.
I wouldn't recommend they watch streaming.
I did use the words communicate.
We all understand? Put the motion. Oh, sorry,
let's
Councillor
go.
Munro, you were going to say? Sorry, Romano?
Pardon?
You going to say something?
No, I agree with it. Let's move on.
Favour? Against? Carried. I'll close the meeting.
No,
And
Mr. Chairman, just a matter of Mr. Chairman.
we don't have matter arisings in this committee. Sorry. Sorry, Councillor
There is a
Duffy.
case. Mr. Chairman, the Economic Development Committee, some years ago, our council, when the electoral debate was on, allocated $100,000 a year. Now, did that disappear as off the radar, or is that still involved with the economic development process?
So over a number of growing jobs, that by year allocation, some of which still exists. I'm just trying to stretch my memory. I think we might have allocated 2 years in one project. That left a year, but it was a 10-year commitment.
One thing I'd like the Economic Development Committee to consider at its next meeting is parking. Now, a lot of approaches people from either end of Summer Street saying, hey, listen, people aren't coming here to my shop anymore and eating because they're getting booked, because the time span is not long enough. And they're being pushed into...
Down there.
I want your economic development. You're the gurus, you're the businessmen around town, you make all these big decisions. I would like them to think about that as to regards to what can be done with a recommendation to the planning department as well. Because I think a number of them have said, look, hey, they won't come to the bottom shop because they're going to get booked, so they go and park in the mainstream of the big shopping centres. And we do know we've lost a number of places in this town. We've lost Myers, we've lost J-Car, we've lost Dick Smith, all those places there. And you go over the other side of town where Big W is, so you can fire a bullet down there sometimes, you wouldn't hit anyone. Side of town, there's a lot of activity. So I think we just need to maybe look at it. Maybe your committee can have a look at that, Mr.
Behalf, I'll raise it. It's a relevant point. But there's certainly, it's about educating people that there are parking down. It's a double-edged sword. You've got people who park there for too long, and then there's no movement, right? People. So it's generally sometimes it's been the business chamber asked for because they want to change it over. All right, I'm going to ask Councillor Romano to come and do the Infrastructure Policy Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Whitten. I'd like to open the Infrastructure Policy Committee meeting at 8:20. Declarations of interest. Does any council have a pecuniary interest, significant non-pecuniary interest, or less than significant non-pecuniary interest? Any matter listed for consideration at this meeting? No. Move on to section 2, the committee minutes. Item 2.1. Minutes of the Airport Community Committee meeting held on the 30th of May. There's a recommendation on page 5.
Move the recommendation.
Moved by Councillor Nugent, seconded by Councillor Brevatera. Is there any discussion on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a general question, maybe the General Manager of the Director can ask. The Air Traffic Safety Committee that looks into accidents on airports and all those type of things there, stakeholder as the owner of the airport, one would tend to think there's consultation with the council as if there is an accident anywhere and those type of processes, and a report would come back to council.
Yeah, certainly our staff have been interviewed, and the CCTV footage that council holds for that previous accident has been viewed by the investigating authority, and I do believe we will get a copy of a report, but that's still some time away.
Releasing it public.
As a stakeholder, we would.
But we all over the investigation.
So one would tend to think we would get.
I don't doubt we'll get a report. I don't think they'll release it.
I'm not after the actual. I'm not after the air traffic safety report.
Well, what kind of report, Councillor Duffy? I'm a little bit confused with your question. What kind of report would you like back to council?
The general manager understands where I'm coming from, so does the director. We tend to think if there's an accident in any airport, if the council owns the area, there will be a report coming back to the council about our involvement. Something gone graciously wrong on our behalf or somewhere else's behalf, we are responsible. And we're sorry for not standing.
It's not the safety accident report.
Yep, I'm happy with that.
Any further discussion? I'll put the motion on that item. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Item 2.2.
Sorry, Councillor Romano. On the airport. Just on the airport, I had an inquiry from a concerned ratepayer from out that way regarding property at 864 Aerodrome Road, on the Hunley Road. That refers to the house which council own. The concerns are that that property appears to becoming a derelict style property and is an eyesore for our visitors who are going to the airport. The question is, does council have any plans for those premises, or is there any opportunity that the property could be either demolished or at least cleaned up a bit, so the people visiting that area can have a bit of appreciation about what we're trying to do out there?
Yeah, through the chair, absolutely. We're looking at leasing some of the land there we've got around the airport at the moment. You'll see it's got quite a bit of feed in on those lots, and the same thing with the properties. So they'll either be cleaned up in due course or be developed to such an extent that they'll be able to be leased.
With regard to the property at 864, due course is quite broad. What would you consider an appropriate time frame to do something that property, to either clean it up or rent it out or do whatever?
You have to take that on notice, Councillor Miletto. Just in regard, like while I run the operations of the airport, I don't actually run the leasing arrangements.
Thank you.
Move on to item 2.2, minutes of the City of Orange Traffic Committee meeting held on the 12th of June. Moved by Councillor Turner.
I'll even second that one, Mr. Chairman. I'll even second it.
Your name? Duffy. Yes. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question on that one. I hope the author can answer this. I mean, I was asked today by 2 or 3 different people as regards to the parking on Woodward Street, and so I got it in my own mind there because I only had a brief look at it. It's virtually from where the new wonderful Blisses are put in all the way across to the end of Racecourse Road. Is that correct? There's going to be no parking inside? You get the report within the Traffic Committee?
Number, Councillor Duffy.
What item number, Councillor Duffy, are you referring to?
The author was Mr.
3.3. 3.3, item 3.3.
Copy news.
Racecourse Road. It was a good meeting because a number of people came to me and they don't want parking along there anyway.
Any further discussion? I'll the motion. All in favour? Move on to section 3. Sorry, 2.3.
77.
2.3. Minutes of the Floodplain Risk Management Committee on the 18th of June. Recommendation on page 277.
Move the recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Nugent. Seconded. Councillor Whitten, was it?
Yep.
Any discussion? No discussion. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Section 3. Item 3.1, current works. I have a mover. Nugent and Turner. Councillor Nugent, Councillor Turner as a seconder. Any discussion? Councillor Nugent.
Oh, look, just a quick comment on the Southern Link Cycleway. I had the opportunity to ride it along there the other day. It was great that it's finally open, and it's an amazing, it's quite an amazing development. The work that's gone on there, and the fence, the new security fencing and gates. I was sort of riding along there. I was going, wow, who's built this? So council actually built that and paid for it. Was that all part of council's? I suppose that's a question.
Part of council's work through the chair. Yes, it is all part of council's work. Some of it was done with contractors and what have you, and some of the funding for the works was also through grant funding.
Anyway, look, I think it's a fantastic development. The way it links all the way, almost back down to Woodward Street, I think, through paths, and the opportunity for young people and older people like myself to ride to ride that path to going to school or going out to Gosling Creek, or going to James Sheen or going to the Orange Christian School. I think it's fantastic. So I just wanted to commend everyone involved in that development.
Thanks, Councillor Nugent. I'd like to make a comment. Councillor Whitten, I just want to make a comment on the sewer, raising the sewer manholes. I noticed here on page 288, there's quite a few streets with these dipped sewer manholes. If I may, I'd like to add Coronation Drive to the list from Ploughman's Lane heading into Orange. There's approximately 10 sewer inspection pits along that road. If staff could look into that for me, I'd very much appreciate it. Councillor Whitten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of points I'd like to raise that have been brought to my attention. The airport taxi rank. Some time ago we put in the budget, I don't know if it's still in it or not, put a shelter there for the taxis. Every time I get off the plane and walk out, the lads grab me. When are we getting our shelter? And I'd like to be able to tell them something. Otherwise I might not have to walk into town.
Thank you. Through the chair, Councillor Whitten. The airport taxi rank shelter was part of a Resources for Regions application. Unfortunately, it was an unsuccessful application. What was successful was the Southern Feeder Road Stage 4. However, as soon as we got notice that we were unsuccessful for that, we were also advised of a new round 6 of the Resources for Regions grant applications. Yep. So we intend to resubmit another grant along the same lines.
Should I give out Councillor Waddell's mobile number to the taxi guys? Would that be a recommendation? Wonderful.
Thanks, Councillor Whitten.
There's a cycleway out there for you.
There's as you go to the airport, the new section where that bend is. It is a accident waiting to happen. Anybody who's been out there during a lot of people who just don't know it's there just complain. So I should imagine that there's a reason for that. I think there was an easement there with the gas or something like that. But is there any way to look? Touch wood, that what I'm talking about now. But it is pretty dangerous. Yeah.
What about some reflection signs or something that?
I'll leave it to the director to come up with something. We'll look at it and come back to us. I think that's it, Mr. Chairman. There was another one, but I can't remember.
Take your time.
That important. Can I
I've
take
got
my time?
Councillor Miletto's got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just with regards to the Macquarie pipeline, I note that the council have been releasing data as to what's being pumped out there at various months and that. Just wondering whether there's an opportunity for council to provide some further information as to what level the Macquarie River is at the end of each month and also at the time the water's taken out.
Yeah, absolutely. I can provide that. Currently it's running around 50 megalitres a day. We don't actually, under our licence conditions, we can't pump until it reaches 108 megalitres per day. We put a nominal safety on top of that. We don't physically start pumping until we get to 119 megalitres per day.
Yep.
So it needs some fairly significant flow within it before we actually pump out of it.
Yeah, I understand that. I was a bit like Councillor Duffy. I was approached by a few people down the street today who were asking me the same question, is council don't seem to have that data as to what the level is of the Macquarie River at the end of each month, so hence the reason I'm just raising it.
Yeah.
We can provide some additional information in the report.
Thank you.
And there is I think there's an app that anyone's welcome to download as well, so I can get details of that.
Does the app show?
It shows the level, current gauging level of the Macquarie River at any one point in time.
I understand
on a
that.
daily basis.
No, I understand that, but the people who approach me are elderly people and don't know how to use the app, so I can, when I see them again, I'll certainly draw their attention to the app if I knew what it was called.
Get it on your phone.
Thank you.
Can
Thank
I?
you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 4 things that I want to make comment on. The first one, I'll go to the first one first, which was what Councillor Miletto was talking about, the megalitres that have come out probably in the last 18 months, which equates to around about 69 megalitres, which is about 3.5 days' water for Orange. So, I mean, but I was under the impression that 640 megalitres that we purchased we could take any time we liked over a period of 12 months. So there's no need to report that, I suppose, whatsoever. So in respect to what the levels are of the river, is that correct or am I wrong?
Hold 2 licences. One's the town water licence, which is subject to the... Or the 6, I think... That licence is still active. Go through a process to trigger that, were we to use. I think it was to offset the impact.
At 69 megalitres is not much, is it? You know, when you think about it, 3.5 days. I mean, a couple of years ago, we would have had that amount of water in our potholes, you know, that type of thing there. But I just want to go on to the cycleways, which Councillor Nugent mentioned as regards to the cycleways. When they come down into the city, I mean, if Popcorn Kobe wants to take his girlfriend to the cinema over there, there's no bike racks there at all. So is there a way that we can actually look at these cycleways to have destinations where they can put their bike? I mean, the ones in the streets and the car parks in the streets I think are absolutely awful because they're taking up a valued car spot. But others I've seen parked off the side of the street, probably in other areas are probably a good look. So I'd just like us to look at that way if the kids are going to come down that way. Long-awaited hot mix report. We're going to need Fenimores to bring this to us, aren't we? It's been coming for a number of years, isn't it?
I never set him up.
See
you later, mate.
It's going to come out and bring Armaguard with it, I think. But listen, one of the things that worried me with the hot mix is, and I just wonder, could we have a report come to all councillors as regards to the ice on the actual smooth ice thing. I mean, you go around Racecourse Road, around that bend, we've got signs up, it's slippery. We've seen cars come around it because it's smooth. But down in the snowy, they don't have that real smooth hot mix. They have a bit of a rough stuff there where there's not that doesn't create that at all. So we just want to, when the hot report comes, we address that issue as regards to the ice skating on that one there. And the other one is with the airport. I mean, I'm hearing so many words about this airport training thing for Qantas and things like that. I mean, I don't even think we're in the mix for that, are we? I mean, anymore. We've been knocked on the head some time ago, and so it's not going to come to us. So I think it's wasting our time anymore to come to that. And they're the only concerns that I have.
An assumption or a question?
Councillor Duffy. No further discussions. I'll put the motion. Councillor Turner, nearly got away.
Nearly got it. Mr. Chairman, regarding Mount Canobolas State Recreation Area, as we know, some months ago the fire went through there, and amongst other things, it basically not so much destroyed, but took away any recognition of the walking trails that throughout the state recreation area. And I know the government said that something along the line, there was no funding, no immediate funding to restore signage, etc. But I'd like to write to the appropriate ministers seeking some information as to when those walking trails are going to be restored. As a lot of us would know, the Volcanic Mountain Challenge was cancelled this year because of the trail's non-existence, so to speak. And my son was up there last weekend, and even though he's been up there a number of times, he found difficulty in trying to find where the trails went because there's still no signage and the paths haven't been cleaned up, so to speak, to make a little bit visible where they may go. And if nothing is done, the Volcanic Mountain Challenge may have to be cancelled again next year. And I remind Council that nearly half the people that go in that challenge are from Sydney and other parts of New South Wales, not Orange residents. So again, it's indirectly bringing money into town because they say at least one night, and if it was cancelled 2 years in a row, it would lose some of its momentum. And there's 600 to 800 people walk, jog or struggle up during that mountain challenge, and I'm proud to say that I'm one of them. So I miss it as well. So if we could write to the Minister seeking clarification when those trails will be opened, re-signposted and available to the general public.
Thanks, Councillor Turner. Councillor McRae.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Look, this is in relation to the airport, and I think first of all acknowledging Councillor Duffy's I think statement that we haven't been successful in being ranked for the finalists for the Qantas Training School, but let's remain positive about opportunities to bring new employment and new training schools, potentially a future one to Orange. But I would like to note the increase in passenger numbers consistently every month for the year to date, and I would be interested in if we could have a comparison perhaps of the final year's financial figures in total. But also whether there's any other information regarding airport passenger numbers and how we can maintain that positive growth. Obviously, it's the biggest we've had every year for the last 4 or 5 years. Whether there's any ways we can continue that.
And also,
absolutely, through the chair, I might just give you some rough numbers now that I have at the moment. I'm still waiting on June's numbers, but Rex's flights have increased by in the average of about 10% for the financial year. Then obviously Fly Corporate have been running since February of 2017 into Brisbane, then from October of last year into Melbourne. So they also have some influence over the numbers. So last financial year we had passenger numbers of just under 57,000 for the airport, and this financial year we're targeting around 70,000.
Councillor Miletto.
Follow-on question.
Councillor Miletto was up first.
Councillor Duffy, if you want.
My questions are following. Can we have on that report as well the actual subsidies we as may be over the period of years to see what it's actually cost us to get that increase?
Yeah, certainly. There's there's some confidential arrangements in place. I wouldn't call them subsidies though.
I'm happy to take it in.
Yeah,
Got nothing to do with that, Councillor Duffy. It's about making seats available. That's what
Councillor
makes
Melito?
numbers flow.
Councillor Melito, did you want to?
Yeah, just listening to Councillor Turner just jolted my memory about something which occurred today. Acknowledge, I was up the Pinnacle today having a walk up there, and I noticed that about 2/3 of the way up on those stairs there's an exposed dirt which is bright orange. It appears to be going up to the tower. And so Councillor Prevotero can enlighten me on what that is, but my concern is that this conduit is right beside the steps, about 2/3 of the way up there. Wouldn't comply with any regulation as to how deep it is. I know there has been some soil erosion there, but I'm concerned what it is, and can we draw it somebody's attention to do something about it fairly quickly?
Given that's a
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Whitten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't go without on the record acknowledging through the Director of Technical Services the road maintenance teams are doing a wonderful job around grading our roads around the community at the moment, and putting a good effort in. And yeah, if you could just pass that on to your team, Mr. Director. And just on the airport numbers, yeah, I travel a fair bit, and I've just noticed that Rex have put on a number of additional flights. They've their fares down, and certainly the other fly corporate are getting well. As I've been saying for years, that there's been a debate about doing certain things at the airport, and the reason that airlines don't do it is because we don't do the numbers. Well, you can't do the numbers if you don't have seats. Airlines have to make the seats available. So, and that's what they're doing. Both airlines are being. I'm actually flying for the first time to Melbourne with Fly Corporate tomorrow, and I can honestly say it's saving me about $1 rather than going.
Councillor Melito, further question?
Is that the Parks and Gardens were included in this infrastructure policy. Today I was approached by a resident of Orange, a long-time resident, and he approached me about support for the publication of a booklet on the trees of Cook Park. This man has got a PhD from the New England University, Dr. Malcolm Campbell. Now, what Mr. Campbell would like to do, he's a member of the Orange Rotary Club, and has been for a long period of time, and he would like Council to consider assisting the Orange Rotary Club in producing or the publication of a booklet titled The Trees of Cook Park. Now, what Mr. Campbell rightly says is that there's some outstanding trees in Cook Parks, and he's also helped publish similar booklets with regards to the trees of Duntree League and the trees of Wentworth Golf Course. His vision is, and the vision of also a number of other members of the Orange Rotary Club, is that they put this book together, and with the assistance of council, and also it'd be sold at Gantry up there, and also down at the Visitors Centre. Proceeds, obviously, once they pay for the book, will be donated to various people. Difficulty with it is how to identify the trees. I mean, there's a map which identifies the trees, and he would like to speak about that. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity for next council meeting that Mr. Campbell be invited along, just to show his vision of what he would like to do in the Rotary Club. Quite happy to do that if.
Take that on notice. We'll talk to Mr. Campbell after finance.
Bit of both.
You councillors, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried. Councillors, that concludes the Infrastructure Policy Committee meeting, with the time being 8:45 p.m. And I call on Councillor Nugent to conduct the Environmental Sustainability Policy Committee.
Early, go.
Thank you, Councillor Romano. I'd like to open the Environmental Sustainability Policy Committee meeting of 3rd of July 2018 with the time being 8:46. Firstly, declarations of interest. Does any councillor have any pecuniary interest, significant non-pecuniary interest or less than significant non-pecuniary interest in any of the matters listed for consideration at this meeting? No? Great. So we'll move on to item 2.1, the minutes of the Environmental Sustainability Community Committee. There's a recommendation on...
Move the recommendation.
Page 5. Thank you, Councillor Turner. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Privatera. Is there any discussion on this item? Yes, Councillor Duffy.
Mr. Chair, my question goes back to something from alert from Canberra as regards to Green Frogs Australia as promoting solar lighting in our streets, and I believe it could be a good topic or a chance to obviously set aside some area in the new Shirley subdivision where we could look at that. Because one of the things that did come out about it was that current, they're not my figures, and I don't know whose figures they are, but they were quoted that the current upkeep of a lighting pole is $780 a year. The current electricity process we got here, and under this new one here, it brings it right down to around about $100. Wondering, is it an opportunity for us to either get someone from this company or the subsidiary of the company to come and address council or inform us of actually how this process works? Getting better and better. The technology is getting better and better as we go.
Thanks, Councillor Duffy. I'll just ask the General Manager to address that issue.
Rather than get a specific company, we'd probably prefer to do providing a report. Solar light, I'm aware, and be able to add some discussion to this that we're already seeking to put some parks. So rather than
I'm happy with that. Yeah,
neutral.
I'm happy with that. It could be anyone you want to get. I'm more interested in the actual saving to council and the electricity charges. Upkeeps of these things.
I wouldn't mind expanding that into the use.
Benefit to us. Let's go.
Okay, thank you for that, and I, do note that I think that sits under the city's power partnership pledges. That's something that we can be looking at further. Thank you.
Like me moving it.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Councillor Whitten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now remember what I was going to bring up, Councillor Romano, but I'll whack
Sorry, it's too late.
I'll whack it in here if you give me the go, because we're talking about streetlights, and it's exactly streetlights. Streetlights around the city that are not working. Lots of them. The General Manager is right across it.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Not sure that's an environmental sustainability issue, but maybe it is.
Giving me the opportunity to raise it during your committee.
Thank you.
Don't listen to Councillor Duffy. So, could I ask through you to the General Manager? I take it we're aware of, there is a number of...
Yeah, we've got quite a lot of reports recently. What the lights. There seems to be a spike in these issues, and we're having a look at just how it's working. So, circulate a memo on that when.
The ones I've noticed at some of the intersections. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Councillor Whitten. Any other discussion, questions? I'd just like to note that in the minutes of the meeting, under item 2, there was a separate planning meeting of the Environmental Sustainability Community Committee held a couple of weeks after that, after this meeting, and it was a very productive session. We went for about 3 hours on a Monday night. It was facilitated by one of the members of the committee, And I thank Councillor McRae and Councillor Privatera for their support of that activity, and also the Director of Development Services and his team for helping facilitate that planning session. A number of really good project ideas came out of that, including one on walk the talk on plastic, basically doing our part to set an example for the community about reduced plastic consumption. And we've just kicked off Plastic Free July, and a number of members of the committee are really just running with that project very, very well. And I think working with our council communications team to sort of get the word out about the initiatives being undertaken. So thank you one and all for your support of that particular project. All right. Now I think I've had a mover and a seconder. So all those in favour of the recommendation, say aye. Okay. All those against? No. Okay. The motion is carried, and that, councillors, concludes the Environmental Sustainability Policy Committee, with the time being 8:51. And I call on Councillor McRae to conduct the Finance Policy Committee.
I'm happy to move that I do services next, and then Councillor McRae can sit there for the rest. If Councillor's happy with that.
Objection, which there doesn't appear to be.
Put it to a vote.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll just clear the services policy meeting open at 8:53. Or for any pecuniary interests. No significant pecuniary interests. Move on to item 2.1, which is the minutes of Ageing and Access Committee, the 18th of April. There's a recommendation on page 5. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Nugent, seconded by Councillor Privatera. Discussion? No discussion. I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Against? Aye. Carried. Item number 2.2, minutes of the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Committee on the 28th of May 2018.
I'll move the recommendation.
Moved by Councillor Whitten, seconded by Councillor Romano. Any discussion? Being no discussion, I'll move that recommendation. All those in favour say aye.
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 Being no other matters for Services Policy Committee, I declare the Services Policy Committee at 9:54 and call on Councillor McRae to continue the meeting. Finances and then Council.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. I'd like to open the Finance Policy Committee meeting on 3rd of July 2018 with the time being 8:55. Analog clocks, 8:54, and my vision. Does any councillor have a pecuniary interest, significant non-pecuniary interest, or less than significant non-pecuniary interest in any matter listed for consideration at this meeting? No. We have item 2.1, request for financial assistance. There's a recommendation on page 6.
Ready to move 1 to 7.
Thank you. Sorry, all 7, did you say? Yep. Thank you, Councillor Duffy.
Seconded.
Councillor Romano. Do you have any discussion regarding this? Thank you, Councillor Nugent.
Thank you. Just a question about item 1, or recommendation 1, in relation to the cycle policy and event management. The recommendation is to decline that request. It's understandable. So, well, I suppose the question is, that particular applicant, is that a company, and is that the reason for the application being declined? I mean, it seems like a worthy cause. It's a charity ride raising money for cancer research through the To the Cure charity. There's a lot of local people involved in it, I believe, through newspaper reports that I've seen. It's a fair amount of money, $5,000. But is that the reason why we're declining that particular application.
Thank you, Councillor Nugent. The General Manager, I believe, has some information on that.
At the top of page 7, while it's for a charity event, the company involved is, were a donation approved, it would need to be exhibited.
So we could do it if...
You need to exhibit it for 28 days if you want to. Part of it is...
I think in terms of the general donations policy, we do look at, and the policy requires us to look at who is the recipient. Are they a for-profit entity? And in this case it is. But it is also in general where the funds go to, and the determination that we fund activities that benefit residents of the Orange LGA is another key aspect. And at this point, even the event organisers in their application don't confirm where the funds will go to. I would suggest in a lot of the cases that we do receive donations, and particularly in relation to the recent budget, there is an opportunity for those groups to come back to council staff and to discuss how they might improve applications for the future, or indeed reapply, particularly if they do make some of those decisions which provide more information regarding their applications. Any further discussions? Thank you, Councillor Whitten.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I suppose what we've got to consider here is that monies that we're using here are ratepayers' money, right? And the donations are going to, in past, we've always had a policy where we've been very careful about giving. Sure, it's great. But during the year, we're going to get a lot of requests from a lot of local groups. We're going to have to decline, unfortunately. So we've got to be careful about giving money to organisations outside the city, because it's ratepayers' funds.
Thank you, Councillor Whitten.
We don't. A question, if I may. We don't use any grant funding to give away for. It's all consolidated revenue.
General Manager.
In the vast majority of cases, yeah. Quite circumstance where there's happened, but
not for a big.
No, not for this.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, councillors. That concludes the Finance Policy Committee meeting. The time being 8:57. If we shuffle some papers around, we'll be returning to the council meeting. I just might remind everybody, I know the batteries do run low on the microphones as the evening goes on, but if we can ensure that all staff and councillors making sure they can be heard for the recording, please.
About the councillor battery.
Make no comment on that one. Thank you, Councillor Whitten. We're up to section 4. We've got 4.1, a notice of motion on trees.
I'd like to move. Oh, sorry.
Councillor Nugent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the motion's there in front of people, but for the sake of the members.
Sorry, do we have a seconder to then have the motion spoken to? Thank you, Councillor Miletto.
So I'd just like to move this the motion that Council prepare a report on the legislative policy and operational options that could be considered in Orange for 1. Reducing the number of significant trees removed, destroyed in new subdivision and infill developments. Number 2, better protection and ensuring the survival of trees to be retained in new subdivision and infill developments. 3, maximising the survival rate of replacement trees planted in compliance with the conditions of consent for development applications. And 4, protecting street trees across the city. So there's some background information there. It's an issue that about the removal of trees and the loss of trees has come up in a number of recent council meetings. Like every planning and development committee meeting, it comes up, and I go on about ad nauseum, which I'm sure annoys some people. But I think it's an important issue. It's not just an environmental issue. It's also a social issue in terms of trees and green space being part of what promotes and creates a very healthy environment for people to live in. Also an economic issue in the sense that our city is known as the colour city, and one of the reasons for that, one of the big reasons for that is our trees and the street trees that we have in Orange, which makes it quite a spectacular city, particularly during the autumn months. So I think there's a number of reasons why we should be looking at this, and it also cuts across, as the staff comment on page 14 indicates, it cuts across a number of council's areas of operations. Also a number of council community committees. So, you know, parks, streets and waterways has a stake in this. The Environmental Sustainability Committee has an interest. I think the Economic Development Committee has an interest in this issue. So, and some of the services committees as well. So I think it sort of covers quite a wide range of council operations. And the staff comment there I really appreciate about that, and also about preparing a report to include any ramifications on resourcing that. So I'd put the motion to council as a positive way that we can sort of look at this particular issue going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Nugent. Councillor Romano.
Madam Mayor, I support in part the tree preservation, but I also have a problem, like a lot of people in Orange, with the earlier part of Orange where trees were planted in new subdivisions. They're causing a lot of problems to the gutters, pipes, roads. I think we should look at, and I think we already are looking at, in new subdivisions, the type of trees that are being planted is very important. Type of tree that doesn't have large root systems. There is enormous problems all over town with tree roots. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we rip them out, but we need to be mindful of what is put in, what is planted. And I'm also aware that in new subdivisions, although they do take some native trees out, a lot of cases, and some native trees have to be removed for whatever reason, roads, block sizes. But the developers are also bound by replanting. They do have to replant a certain number of trees. So I don't think it's all that bad. Everybody hates trees. I love trees, but I think it's the type of tree in a certain area that's important, because with the native trees, a lot of them shed branches. Large branches can come down in windstorms. We've already had situations in preschools where branches have snapped and caused deaths. So we have to be very mindful of what is out there and not blanket the whole city as we're not going to touch trees. We have to maintain them and we have to manage them. And the right type of tree needs to be looked at for new subdivisions.
So are you suggesting an amendment, Councillor Romano, perhaps a number 5 along the lines of assessment of the suitability of street trees and street plantings or tree plantings for climate and urban design?
I think if we're going to develop an area and it has an abundance of eucalyptus trees, native trees, I think the staff have done a pretty good job in preserving whatever they can. But it's come to my attention, the council's attention, that it appears that every time there's a subdivision put in place or a DA comes forward, there seems to be a lot of arguing about some trees. Sort of understand it, but we know that the developers, whatever they take out, they do replace with a more suitable type tree for a residential area, which is a safer type of tree. I mean, any tree can, not any tree, but a lot of trees can come down. Even in floods, and branches break off.
So would you like that included in this motion?
I'd like to put an amendment forward that the type of trees that are placed in subdivisions be carefully judged, and how large they grow, the roots that they develop. Not to
suitability.
Suitability is very important, because it's a shame that
Madam Chair.
particularly in the Glenroy area, there's a lot of native trees that were planted there, and I can recall a lot of people coming to me in the past saying, you know, the curb's all lifted, my driveway's cracked. We need to try and prevent that in the future.
Just clarify that it's not actually specified it's native trees in the motion as I read it, but your concern about the suitability is a 0.5
Correct.
As an amendment. Is the mover amenable to an amendment along those lines?
Amenable to an amendment along those lines? Yes, but I would like to respond to some of Councillor Romano's comments.
I think Councillor Duffy had the floor.
I'll second the motion.
Seconded the motion.
I'll second the amendment. I'm happy with the amendment. Yes, Madam Chair, I want to speak for the amendment. I want to take you to Cara Place, the damage of the big gum trees that did to where former Mayor Tim Sullivan lived and the neighbourhood there. That was a big issue in this council. You go along Sunny South Crescent up there in South Orange there, and there's whopping big gum trees there. They're not suitable for the area. You even go down along William Maker Drive now, and there's about 7 or 8 trees there, white gum trees. They're going to be massive big things in about 10 years' time, and they've got pink ribbons around them. I hope that's to cut them down. They're not suitable for towns. The yellow box trees, the hassle we had to get rid of a yellow box tree that's leaning over into a backyard that's going to crash into a house. They're not suitable for inside towns. Years ago, when you come into Orange, so you travel over the hill into on the Escort Way or the Old Forbes Road, you look down over Westleigh. It is magnificent to look down over the tree, the colour city when you come there. But there's not many gum trees there, is there? There's hardly any. They're appropriate trees for a city that don't do damage to curb and guttering, piping and whatever other things go under the ground there. I'm not a plumber, but I can assure you they do damage. That's why I think the amendment must stay there. I think yellow box trees, white big gum trees, apple box trees, whatever, they're not suitable in town. They're fantastic out in the paddock. They're fantastic in a botanical gardens up there where they are up there. There's no one around them because when they crash, they do it in a big way. The branches come off, they'll come off that size, or the whole lot will go over when they get too balanced. And I think it's important that we have appropriate trees there whatsoever. Otherwise I was going to go and vote against it. I think now we've got the amendment out, I think that's the right decision to make.
Councillor Whitten?
Might have lost something here, Madam Chair, but my understanding is that we're bringing a report back that's looking at legislative policy. We're not creating policy on the fly here. So it doesn't really matter what those 4 points are because staff are going to bring back what the policies legislatively are for tree preservation. We have a tree preservation committee.
Trees. Have a parks, trees and waterways committee meeting tomorrow night.
We have some my understanding is really strict policies and procedures. Ready. If we look at, and I might add, when it comes to trees, it's a common sense approach, right? Because as we've heard here tonight, I've been in this room over the years where we've had gum trees in the street that we just cannot and now are not allowed to cut down. They're dangerous, big, they rip up the road, they rip up footpaths, they drop limbs the size of utes. That doesn't allow us to cut the tree down. Yeah, we go back to tree preservations, we have to bring arborists in, we have to do all sorts of things. So to say that we nearly cut trees down, probably not in a subdivision environment. Yeah, I know as being the chair for some 8 years, that is a last resort thing. Bringing trees down for DAs and developments is a last resort. Trees in there that don't need to come down, they're not allowed to move them. So a lot of these things are already placed. I'm happy to support the motion that Councillor Nugent's put forward because he has relevant concerns and we need to consider them. But I think what we need to do is be very careful about painting ourselves into a corner because we already are in a corner to some effect, and rightly so, because we have an open slather to remove because we don't like the tight style of the tree it is. And yeah, and everybody knows it's common sense. You don't plant gum trees, but it didn't affect Wahroonga. If anybody's been to Wahroonga, it's like being in state forest and got these giant, massive white gum trees right next to your bedroom window. I go through there during a storm and you think that's an area where they can afford to fix things. But yeah, they're dangerous. So Yeah, it's a common sense approach. We already have a lot of these policies and procedures in place. It's not easy to simply take a tree out, and if we do have to take one out, we have to put something back in its place. But I'll support them. Dan.
Thank you, Councillor Whitten. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting the motion. Where it says Council prepare a report on the legislative policy and operational options, etc., etc. I can see all that's going to do is raise another level of bureaucracy within the system, which I believe at the moment works pretty well. Council have I believe that we have a fairly flexible policy as far as tree preservation, what should be planted. Sure, as been mentioned by a couple of the councillors, there has in the past been inappropriate trees planted. Out at Clifton Grove where I lived, the neighbour, I suppose they were free at the time, he's planted row of radiata pines and they are totally inappropriate. He probably planted them because they were free. Over the years, without a tree preservation policy, as I believe this would be, so bureaucratic, over the years coming in from Cargo, when I had the farm out there, I saw Wesley, which was a former dairy, with virtually no trees on it whatsoever. We saw the houses going up, then we saw the trees, then slowly disappear most of the homes. All planted voluntarily, some of them, yes, inappropriate varieties. Then they developed Waiari, the same thing, the streets went in, the houses went in, slowly the trees came up. I come in now from Clifton Grove, come over the top of Dalton Street and Mount Lindsay. Most of the time you can hardly see orange, covered in trees, without any extra bureaucracy that I believe this recommendation is proposing. So I think one of the reasons now that perhaps some of the newer areas are not being covered in vegetation as quickly as Waiaris and Westleys are is because of our water restrictions and the cost of water. Not because people don't want to plant trees, it's just quite often they are planting them and the ones on the council verge, etc., a lot of them die purely and simply because we congratulate ourselves because we're not using the amount of water that we used to. But that's one of the downsides of not using the water that we used to, is that a lot of the trees are not surviving and a lot of people aren't watering like they used to because of the cost of water. So I don't think we need any more, as I said, bureaucracy. I don't think we need this recommendation even to get the report, because if we get the report, it's going to take time to interpret it, and I don't believe that we need it. I think we're doing a pretty good job at the moment. Council has some regulations and most people abide by them. Most people are proud of their little parcel of land here in Orange, and I think the vast majority of people do the right thing. We don't need any more rules and regulations.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Miletto.
Thanks, Councillor Turner. I support the motion because I read a quote last week and it actually said best tree is one which was planted 20 years ago. Second best one is one which is planted tomorrow. I think that supports what Councillor Nugent says. We have to be mindful of what we're trying to do, and we are trying to do is obviously, and I take on board what Councillor Romano says, we have to be vigilant about the types of trees that we are planting, but at the end of the day we have to have a system in place which ensures the survival of our trees, and hence the reason why I support.
Thank you, Councillor Miletto. Any further discussion? Right of reply. Thank you, Councillor Nugent.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Good to see have a discussion about trees and green space in Orange. It is one of the things that we're going for. In terms of Councillor Turner's comments, thank you for those views. I don't necessarily agree with them in terms of we're doing the best job we could. We're doing a pretty good job, but are we doing the best that we could be doing. I'm not so sure. Certainly the feedback I get from the people that I talk to, and maybe we don't talk to the same people, but is that, you know, maybe there's more we could be doing in terms of preserving some of the trees in subdivision developments. And in terms of coming down as a last resort, as Councillor Whitten said, in my view, there's certain developments that we've approved where a fairly minor redrawing of some of the boundaries, or maybe taking out one lot, could have saved a couple of fairly significant trees. So I'm not sure it is a case of last resort. I think Westleigh is an admirable suburb, and I've been in there many times doing for various reasons, and I'm pretty sure that I've seen some eucalypt trees in there once or twice. But eucalypts, I love eucalypt trees. I love gum trees. Maybe they're not appropriate in all places and locations, and I think we've learnt a lot in the last 15, 20 years about what where to approach to plant trees that are appropriate for the particular location. So they're not going to impact on our infrastructure, and they're not going to impact on houses. We've learned a lot. We have a manager city presentation who makes recommendations about these sorts of things. So I think we've gone past the point where we may be making big mistakes about what sort of trees we're planting. I don't think we're not talking about making any decisions tonight. We're talking about a report about what other things might be done. There has been mention of tree bonds, and I'd like to sort of see what that actually looks like. When it comes to replanting or replacement trees, Councillor Romano, yes, there are replacement trees, but how many of those actually survive, through to maturity? I'm not sure that there's a period in which they have to be looked after, but do they actually, after that period, do they survive? Sure. So, look, I think, yes, we are doing a pretty good job. I'm not sure that we're doing the absolute best job that we could do. Happy to take on board that amendment in terms of the appropriate trees and appropriate locations. That would have been part of, the report anyway. But I commend the motion to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nugent. If I can just confirm that the seconder, Councillor Miletto, was happy to also accept that fifth point regarding the suitability.
Yes, I am.
Thank you. So that becomes embedded in the motion. So with no further discussion, all in favour?
The move of the motion is Councillor Romano's, and
I believe that the amendment was accepted by the mover, so it actually is.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I wanted Councillor Romano's amendment kept.
No, we were moving it into the main motion, which would remain under Councillor Nugent and Councillor Miletto as a part 5. So,
what did you second?
I seconded your amendment. I wanted it to go through separately.
The amendment was accepted by the mover, and my understanding is that if it's accepted by the mover as an amendment, it becomes part of the motion and the seconder.
Madam Chair, just for clarification, the mover and the seconder are now saying that they're going to withdraw their motion and accept Councillor Romano's motion.
And it was added as a part 5.
I didn't accept that.
You were not the seconder. It was accepted by the mover and it was accepted by the seconder.
Of Councillor Romano's.
My understanding from Councillor Romano's motion was that happy with parts 1, 2, 3 and 4 and simply want 5, that the type of trees, suitability of those trees be also. Is that correct, Councillor Romano?
Happy to accept.
Why?
Can't even remember what I spoke about.
When that was proposed as an amendment, the mover accepted it to be included, so it didn't. Now confirming with Councillor Miletto as the seconder of the original motion, also including it, it is all under one.
The mover can be quite happy to do it
as a matter of process.
The
mover and the seconder of the motion are accepting point 5. Now it becomes the motion, nullifies the amendment. There is no amendment.
Correct.
I just made it up, and it's up to the chairman to decide.
Meeting practice.
Thank you for somewhat clarifying that. Anybody who does want to see who proposed that step 5 can, of course, look at the live stream to see the discussion. So we do have 5 points now in the motion, and I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 4.2, notice of motion on the city's power partnership. Councillor Nugent.
I'd like to move the motion that...
Thank you, Councillor Duffy, as seconder.
That the report on the Bathurst E1000 electric vehicle road test and roundtable held on 29th of May be acknowledged.
We need further discussion on this?
I don't think I need to say anything. It's all fairly self-explanatory. If anyone's got any questions or comments, I'd be happy to.
I'll ask, is there anybody against or speaking with questions?
I just want to support Councillor Nugent what he's actually doing here, because I know a number of years ago we had trials down at Mount Panorama before. But one of the issues that it did raise, and I hope we continue to go along to these meetings and find out how quiet these vehicles are. It's going to create pedestrian crossing problems and all those type of things there, because people can't hear them coming. On what's actually happening with these electric vehicles, and I think it's a step positive, because maybe they should see the disappearance of petrol in these ways because of exorbitant price they charge.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Any further discussion? We'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Carried. 4.3 is my notice of motion regarding the Orange Rail Action Group. I'm happy to move from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Turner. If I might ask, is there any need for any questions on this one? I might highlight the four main areas in which the Orange Rail Action Group is advocating is the main Western Line infrastructure upgrade between Orange and Lithgow. In simple terms, it's trying to take out the bends, which means trains will be able to go faster by reducing the gradient of the curves. Number 2 is an early morning train, Sydney Orange. It's not necessarily renaming the Bathurst Bullet, but seeing whether we can actually engage that early morning service from Orange. Number 3 relates to the new train delivery program and advocacy for Orange and other Western areas to be part of that rollout. And 4 is the maintenance, manufacturing and component assembly, obviously an economic opportunity, an employment opportunity, but that's perhaps something to look at further down the track, particularly in relation to the delays in the new train program itself. So I might, Councillor Whitten.
The question, Madam Chair, probably to you and to Councillor Nugent. What are you hoping to achieve by raising notice of motions for acknowledgement? Emotional, or is this a sign of support from Council?
So particularly for this one I can speak to, it is a sign of support and awareness of Orange Rail Action Group's activities. We do have a councillor who represents on that particular body, which is me. So this is a way for them to have their items acknowledged.
What the motion says, though. Motion of
That's
support.
true.
Motion of...
Oh, would you like to propose an amendment? Would you like to do more about it, or are you happy with the
I'm only just
motion?
advising. I get paid consultancy fees, right? I'm not going to put words in your mouth. I read these and I'm just thinking, why are we raising motions? Knowledge things, reports.
Thank you, Councillor Whitten. Some people might keep their powder dry.
Yeah, okay. Because they're not going to be done, nothing's going to be done with them, if you know what I mean. Yeah,
thank you, Councillor Whitten. I appreciate the advice. Councillor Nugent, do you want to respond to that question?
Not really.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of these sorts of motions, this particular one, I'd like to commend you for bringing it forward. I think it's important when there's stuff happening, when councillors go to represent council at particular events, that we bring back reports about what was said, what we found out, what information was provided. I think it's important to bring that back to council, and not just into a community committee, but into the full council, so all councillors and the community have the opportunity to see what their councillors are doing with the ratepayers' money. In terms of this particular one, I think it's these 4 areas are really, really important areas, and I noticed under the staff comment that. As part of the community strategic plan, we've got Objective 13, and there's a couple of points under Objective 13. The second of which is to lobby relevant government authorities for improved transport linkages. Now, when I read this report, I go, well, Okay, so lobbying, we can be proactive or reactive about that. What plans do we have to lobby government between now and the state election next year? It seems like an important time when we should be lobbying the government. And is that just a role for the Orange Rail Action Group, or is that a role for council more broadly? That's when I read the report. That's what I take away from it.
Thank you, Councillor Nugent. I think there's an item later in the meeting regarding opportunities to canvass support for the upcoming state elections. But at the same time, this kind of motion does provide some support when councillors do then represent council, but also represent Orange at activities like the Inland Rail Forum, at which at least there is an awareness of council's support for the advocacy of a particular group rather than necessarily advocating for that particular group in its own right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do understand why it's presented, but we can present reports without raising motions. I was just reading it and saying, well, motions are for actions for staff to do, create policy. We're going to support it as a council. We agree with what these are doing, but we're just acknowledging the report. I'm happy with that.
Thank you, Councillor.
Means we're not going to do nothing.
No, not at this point. With no further discussion, we'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. Item 4.4, notice of motion from Councillor Duffy.
Happy to move those points 1 and 2.
I'll second that.
We have a seconder. Would you like to speak to that motion, Councillor Duffy?
Madam Chair, the first part of the motion is quite simple. Well, I want to see what each candidate is going to offer our council. I want to know how they're going to bring it here. I want to know what infrastructure they're going to bring to us. We have a lot of programs in our area as far as the Southern Feeder Road goes. We've got the sporting precinct that we want to get up and down. We want to keep the upgrade of Wade Park going. There's plenty of things that we want to happen. And I want to get each of them here, don't matter what political party they belong to, and say, what are they going to do for us and how they're going to bring it here? Are they going to make it happen? That's very straightforward. It's easy to come along. I know that Mr Donato came and addressed council one time, and it was fantastic. Let's give them all the opportunity to come here, all the political parties, and if anyone else who wants to come in is going to stand in the election, see what they're actually going to deliver and how they're going to deliver it to us. The second part of the motion stems back to the previous council. It's about boundary adjustments, which was offered by Mr Balalero, the leader of the National Party. In this chamber here, he addressed it and the day was, I can't get the exact day of it, but I know it was the day we had Polly's in the pub. And Polly's in the pub was at the then Standard or
the Irish
Hotel anyway. And we came in here and I came late to the meeting. I'll tell you, I sat there and I said to him, I was extremely disappointed that they pulled the rug from underneath our feet as regards to the amalgamation of the whole thing. But our council policy was that we wanted a boundary adjustment. The two constituents down the end there, they said, look, we just want boundary adjustments. And that's something he promised. He said, look, let's get those local government elections out of the way and we'll come back and do them. He even promised that his own constituents that at Meridong, on a property out on the Canobolas Road, and we all know who lives there. He also promised that to our previous mayor and deputy mayor. He also promised to previous other councillors on Cabonne Council. But think about this, what it is actually, what we're actually doing if these boundary adjustments don't happen. We're denying people who live around the edge of Orange the right to have a vote in their own community, the right to contribute to their own community. Very important. Why can't they have a vote in their community? This is where their curb and guttering is. This is where their showground is. This is where their doctors is. This is where their newsagent is. This is where their showground is. I can go on and on and on and on for why it is their community of interest. And the difference in the rating structure for rural rating is absolutely enormous. I know this gentleman won't mind, but Chris Blunt, who lives out there on the eastern side, not only does he have to travel through another LGA to get to his head office, paying $22,000 to $23,000 in rates to Cabonne, when under the Orange rural rating system you'd only be paying 8 or 9. So we want that clarity there. But also remember this, another thing here, we want to look at these things here too. Think of the money that the state government's taking out here. Remember when Duncan Gay was at one of these mines-related council meetings and said he was going to talk about giving him royalties back? A little village like West Wyalong, $93 million in royalties went out of West Wyalong for 1 year in 2014 or 13. Just imagine how much money is going into the coffers in royalties to the state government, and I don't care which one's in there. What are we actually getting from it? We're not getting much, are we? Compared to what Bathurst gets. I've said it here plenty of time. Paul Toole walks down that street in Bathurst. He's got community groups and councils hanging off him. He burps, out comes millions. We haven't got that here. So I want to get them here, and I also want to keep that. But Mr. Ballanera, the statutory benefit to Orange is probably around about $10 million grant and income for rates. So that's something we've been missing out for a long time. And a number of groups, head up by Bill Tremor, they did the right thing. They went through the process and met all the government requirements under the need for that, and they were just brushed aside. The opportunity, he made the comment, so let's bring him back here to ask it. I don't care if he doesn't come, but let's make him ask the question to come back when he's going to deliver it, because that's what he said.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Councillor Miletto.
I'm assuming that we're going to be voting separately on both these issues. Is that correct?
At the moment, the motions are together. Are you proposing they be separated?
Yeah, I propose an amendment to they be dealt with separately, and I've just got a comment with regards to the first.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that, Madam
Thank you,
Chair.
Councillor Whitten.
The reason I say that is because with regards to the question number 1, the council right to invite all candidates in the March 2019 New South Wales state election to address council at an open forum. I guess my concerns with this, I don't object to what the motion is, but I'm looking at the time frame and when people would decide to run. And I know that council, we have a bit of a close down period over January and that. So I'm just wondering, when we look at time frames to make this invitation, how that would work, because obviously no indication of who will be running up until a certain point of time.
Okay, I'm going to give lift to part 1 of the motion. Your state of declaration was for candidates.
That's my point exact.
And pull it on then. About that, you could ask for a report to clear all that stuff up. But not unusual for councillors, once the declaration of who is running, to speak out the candidates as what they're looking at bringing to the town.
Thank you, Councillor Miletto. Councillor Whitten.
Look, I'll speak.
You're speaking for the amendment to address them separately?
Yep. Look, I don't see any advantage bringing candidates into council to tell us what they're going to do for the city. I'd rather get them back here after they win. We're giving them free soapbox. You don't know how many there's going to be. We'll let the Premier come back and talk about the stuff that he's the Deputy Premier. He's already in power. He wasn't here for. But I don't see any advantage giving people a soapbox to come here about. We hear enough about politicians making promises that they don't fulfil. Everybody who puts their hand up, I've got the greatest respect for. But probably better to talk to them. There's going to be that many, when the election comes, Chamber will have a forum, everybody will have a forum, Farmers Association will have a forum, everyone will have forums, candidates will have plenty of time to tell the community about everything, all the wonderful things they're going to do for the community.
Thank you, Councillor Whitten. So my understanding is that we have some different opinions as to whether people are for or against the two motions. They're not necessarily for both or against both. I would suggest we do need to vote to first of all see if we address the motions separately. Happy to split them. Thank you, Councillor Duffy. In that circumstance, do we need to check that the seconder?
Happy to just move part 1 and then do part 2. Okay.
Thank you. So we will address the motion separately. Motion 1, that council right to invite all candidates in the March 2019 New South Wales state election to address council at the open forum. Councillor Turner.
I speak against that one, Madam Chair. Along the line of Councillor Whitten, all the times that I have stood for various elections, I can't remember ever addressing a council. I've addressed councils afterwards, after I became the member, but not prior. If we had it here, as Councillor Whitten said, the senior citizens usually put one on, the ratepayers have the opportunity to put on an open forum where everyone can come and everyone can ask questions. If we have it here in the council chamber, I would imagine that either the senior citizens or the ratepayers would probably not go ahead with a planned meeting that they may have been planning, which then the general public who may be in the audience, unless we moved to make it okay, they wouldn't be able to ask questions. We would be able to ask questions, but not the general public of the candidates, whereas they can in a meeting organised outside of council. So, and again, most of the time, vast majority of people that turned up at those meetings were the candidates and the candidates' supporters, very few members of the public, half a dozen at the very most. There's so many other opportunities today through the internet and open forums and the web pages in the paper, etc., where people can find out what they want to know from the candidates. And again, I don't believe that council should get that involved in the state election or the federal election. I think we should stay away from it as much as we can. We try to make this apolitical as much as we can, not like some of the councils down in Sydney. So I don't believe that we should or that we need to get involved in either of these motions.
Councillor Turner, any further discussion before I ask the mover if they'd like to close the debate on motion 1?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First point is it's only an offer. Come if they want to, they don't have to if they want to. Second point is, I want to jog your memory, Councillor Turner. One time when you snuck across the line, there was a debate held at Bond Council. There was 4 candidates. There was Kevin Duffy, Russell Turner, John Davis and Jeremy Buckingham. Jeremy Buckingham was the only one that didn't turn up. Because he said to me, I didn't turn up because it would have cost him votes if he did turn up. But the other 3 candidates turned up and addressed Cabonne Council. Now, I see nothing wrong with it. I mean, I don't have any problem with it, with the issue at all. I would be much rather sitting here and asking questions that are pertaining to here as to our infrastructure that we actually want as councillors and taking on board what our community strategic plan is. Important. I'm happy to go with what Councillor is.
Sorry, Councillor Duffy, I have a question of you just in relation to the details. So you've just described a previous engagement with the state candidates in a council setting. Was that an open forum of the style that we have where each person addressed council, or was it actually a debate that was in the council setting?
The operation of the council at the time was well run, that council too at that time. We suspended council orders meeting process and we allowed the candidates to speak. We went to lunch, we invited Councillor Turner and Davis at the time and everyone to lunch that day, and then we resumed the council meeting after lunch.
Did you deliver all the promises you made to Cabonne during that visit? I'm sure you did.
I declared the free lunch that I got.
Let's come back to the point at hand. The clarification is, was it a two-way conversation or was it an address by the candidate for my own?
What they do, yes.
Just so that I can clear the opportunity. It was an address. It wasn't a question and answer.
An address, and I think it was the process that was in place. It was a fairly easygoing area, easygoing day, because I mean most of the councillors and even the gallery at the time knew who the councillors were or the candidates were, and I think it was the odd question did pop up as to what Councillor Turner was going to do or what other people were going to do.
Thank you for clarifying that. My question was whether there were questions from the audience or from the councillors during a speech, and that's what I'm interested in. Okay, I think
did you sway all of the National Party councillors at Cabonne?
Thank you, Councillor Whitten. That's probably a discussion for outside the meeting, I might suggest.
God, I got elected, he didn't.
Gentlemen.
All we knew is he snuck across the line.
Number 1, the motion is that the council write to and invite all candidates in the March 2019 New South Wales state election to address council at the open forum. All in favour? Against? Oh.
Nothing vote.
I'm going to explain what I'm going to do. So my understanding is I've just voted in a particular direction for this motion, which actually was to vote against. To even out my vote, I will now vote for the motion, which basically eliminates my vote, so it actually comes back to the majority of the other councillors in the room.
Oh, you don't go with the status
I choose
quo.
to do that, which means the motion is carried. That's not the rules. That's my belief in terms of how I will use a casting vote.
Chair, you're the chair. You vote how you like.
Item 2, we are now addressing the second part of the motion relating to invitation to the Deputy Premier. Do we need any further discussion on this item? Or Councillor Whitten?
Yeah, okay. I can see, ask the Premier to come back and talk about you've got an LGA boundary changes coming into an election. Sure he's going to come. Good luck.
Look, Councillor Duffy, I'd like to actually ask a question, and perhaps this might relate to whether we need a report relating to some more of the details. So I would be interested in exactly when the Deputy Premier did attend and what he promised in terms of the detail of what these proposed boundary adjustments are, so that we're actually ready if he replies saying that he's coming the next day, but also so that we're perhaps as newer councillors more aware of what we're asking the Deputy Premier to address as an invitation from our council.
Are they on the record promise?
So could we perhaps consider a report would be available before we address?
We move an amendment. Move an amendment to item 2.
I'm quite happy to withdraw that part of the motion. I'm quite happy to withdraw the motion, as long as it comes up at the next council meeting. Because back in that council meeting will be Councillor Taylor, Councillor Hamling, who I referred to, and these other councillors there that actually heard what was actually going on. Again, it's just a request, and there's plenty of time between now. He's been up here, 4 or 5 or 6 times.
I'm happy to support it, Kev. The other one's got through. We may as well go with this one.
Propose an amendment then to your motion, Councillor Duffy, to receive a report on that matter?
I don't think it needs an amendment. We can just bring it back to the next council meeting. I don't particularly care, because I just want it on the table, say, hey, listen, we've been made a promise and we want you to keep it.
As it is.
Process-wise, of where we have a motion on a table and we have a proposal
You're going
to defer.
to need a specific and bring back a report in relation to that, and then it comes back to the next meeting like you've said. So your motion is to call for a report to background item 2 to be presented to the next meeting.
You're happy with that, Councillor Duffy? And as the seconder, Councillor Romano, are you happy with that?
That's fine.
Do we need any further discussion on the deferment? Councillor Miletto.
Just going to come in. Look, I'm happy to support a letter being written to the Deputy Premier to come along. I'm not quite sure that asking Council to provide a report on something, and sure they've got other things which are more pressing, and whether this is this is disproportionate to what we should be doing, and that's getting on with the business. I think a report, just a letter to Mr. Balalara asking him to come along, rather than asking some director to a few days putting a report together. I'm not quite sure whether that's a good use of council time. It's
my understanding of the question put is to test the veracity of the second part of the motion, where suggested to the Deputy Premier that he's made commitments with certainty over that in the.
Well, perhaps the letter could be drafted in a way to flush out some of those promises which he's previously made and ask for some responses. I mean, I'm happy.
Danny Hill will do that, won't you, mate?
I know what the response is going to be from him. That's all. I'm just not quite sure whether we're banging our head up against a brick wall here, but I'm happy to be corrected.
Thank you, Councillor Miletto. Councillor Whitten.
Look, I agree with Councillor Miletto. I don't see it's any with motion. Write the letter to the Premier, and he may be too busy to come. tie up council resources writing us a report. We then write the letter. He's still too busy to come. Just do the motion, Kevin.
I think
you've made your point.
You've made your point.
So you were happy. Yeah,
Yes, for sure.
I'm happy to do that. Leave our motion there.
So my amendment is that we defer pending a report detailing the two items of when the promises were made and what the promise were. It's not a report that would indicate what the impact of boundary adjustments would be, but it would be the factual information of what date it was promised and what it was about. Do I have a seconder for my amendment? Oh, the amendment nearly failed. Councillor Nugent, thank you for your support. Do we need any discussion? Let's put the amendment. So those in favour of the amendment? Against? The amendment is lost. We return to the original motion, moved by Councillor Duffy, seconded by Councillor Romano, and that is the motion as written. Any further discussion? We might put the motion. All in favour? Against? Motion is carried. We move on to item 4.5, quarterly report on development applications. Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Privatera.
With this resolution, I've spent a great deal of time, and it was a very valuable time that I spent with the director as to working out what we actually wanted to come to the meeting here. And yes, we do, as known at the previous meeting, that we do get a number of each week or each fortnight of how many are left on the books and we got left of DAs that aren't processed. But what I'm looking for is how many of these DAs are 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. What is the hold up? Not only for us councillors, but as transparency for the general public. Because I can tell you, out in that street out there, they're blaming us as a council for the hold up of Myers building over there. They just understand, they say, oh, council are holding it up. Yeah, they probably don't know, they don't have any idea, but hang on, they're blaming us. So we do have some documentation for transparency that tells us what the hold up is. And just a brief report, as the director said, he would say, look, okay, what the hold up is and those type of things there. And maybe the director might make a few comments about what he was actually going to propose. I totally agree with what we spoke about. And the director on his performance.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Any further discussion on this item? Might put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried. Item 5.1, we're moving on to general reports. We have the statement of investments for May 2018 and a recommendation on page 35. Thank you, Councillor Nugent, seconded by Councillor Duffy. Any discussion or questions regarding this item? Councillor Duffy, you got a question?
It's about mine's 5.2.
We might then move on. We'll put the motion. All in favour? Motion is carried. 5.2 is the strategic policy review. Recommendations for this item are on page 42.
Move the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Nugent. We got a seconder?
I'll second that.
I'm happy to second it.
Councillor Duffy.
But I have real concerns about strategic policy number 107.
That's the outdoor dining areas, is that correct?
Outdoor dining areas, and I have a huge problem with that because, I mean, it's okay when you're coming alongside a street where there's a bit of a hedge there and there's someone getting out of a car. 50 centimetres is one about that wide, and the door's not going to run into hit the chairs or the tables or any of those type of things, and people can get in and out. Those type of things, especially in Summer Street. Also, when you're going along Lord's Place, and I've seen it with the outdoor setting along Lord's Place, and where the serving window is from the actual shop into the street, there's only about that wide. And I've given the photo to a number of people there, and a number of people walk through there and have complained to the people sitting there and to the thing, and they've been abused. And to me, that's not, the footpaths are there to walk along. And also a huge amount of people have been complaining about where the actual seats for buses and taxis and all those type of things are, because they're getting wet in winter and the little kids they have catching buses or whatever, transport, whatever the case may be, are prone to get out on the street. I have a huge problem with that one there. I just think it needs totally reviewing, and I'm just wanting some indication from the director when we can do that review. It's working.
Mr Chair, I would think there needs to be a motion to further till the next opportunity, whilst I perhaps contact you, Councillor Duffy, when we go through a few of those examples. I would see a deferral motion, and then perhaps I'll amend it, but I'll clarify how I've amended it, if your point is taken.
So are you moving, Councillor Duffy, a deferment of that particular one, ST 107?
I'm happy to defer that one, but I mean the move of the motion, I think I seconded it. I'm happy to move the motion with the deferral of 107.
Is the mover amenable to that? Right, so it would need to be an amendment. We have a seconder for the amendment that item be deferred. No seconder, the proposed amendment lapses. Councillor Whitten.
We've only just recently in April put on exhibition. Thank you. So it's been before us. We've already known about it. But what I would, in support of Councillor Duffy, through you to the director, we have rules in place. Are these examples breaking the rules? And he's going to go and check those, I imagine. Thank you.
Through Mr Chair, that is my intention. I will go and check them against the rules, and if I find there's gross inconsistencies, then I'll report back with an amended policy. If not, perhaps I'll bring the same one back, but that's to be seen.
It's lapsed. There is no deferral on the table. There will not be a deferral.
Oh, it's not coming back, sorry.
So I guess that raises the question of enforcement, Councillor Whitten. That's what you're asking the director?
If they're breaking the rules, I'm sure the count. Do we still have
Rangers? Through you, Mr Chair, yes, I understand now.
Because in support of outdoor dining, the retail market are doing it tough. We need to allow them within the rules to use every possible means to make a living and they add culture to the city. In many years, there were a lot of councils who were against outdoor dining for a whole bunch of purposes. Me, I've always been in support for it. I'm in support of any business who can do anything to make a dollar, because that dollar employs people and it brings dollars back into the community, and it gives a cosmopolitan.
Thank you, Councillor Whitten. I agree with you that we do need to ensure we encourage particularly outdoor dining, maybe not so much taken up by residents in these kind of single-digit temperatures. But I also would question, and this might go to the Director or the General Manager, if there are concerns which are then identified, particularly with, as Councillor Duffy spoke about, access, particularly for people with disabilities, which might come from any of these policies being implemented, what's the best way for a community member or a concerned councillor to raise that, particularly for the community?
Simply to lodge a request with council. One element of the rework of the CBD so we'll see the policy but it'll certainly get looked at.
And the Director?
Yeah, if I may say, this actual policy has been through the Disability and Access Committee to reach this point. So hopefully we've taken a lot of that on.
Thank you.
Policing exercise.
So I think it sounds like we have some consensus on this particular recommendation. With no further discussion, I'll put the recommendations as written on page 42. All in favour? Against? Carried.
And a couple of wins, Kev. You can't.
Item 5.3 is the Conduct Review Panel. We have a recommendation on page 119. Do we have a mover?
Move the motion.
Councillor Nugent. Thank you, Councillor Miletto, and over to Councillor Duffy.
I speak first, and I have the right to move the resolution, or speak for the resolution, or move a resolution in opposition to that.
Sorry, Councillor Duffy, I was not aware that you were standing to actually move the motion. Okay, can I check with the GM on how I go?
Because I want to defer this till a few other councillors get in this room that have got experience. I'll go through the names here, and this is what Centrock have recommended.
Experience?
Sorry, you've got an amendment propose? What's your proposed amendment?
We defer it.
Seconder for the deferral.
But I'm going to speak against it.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. So you're speaking on the motion now?
I'm speaking against the motion.
Thank you.
You look at the names here, what we've got here, and who are they? I know a couple of them. But who are they? What's their qualifications? What are their legal qualifications? They've been endorsed by Centroc. Centroc's made up of mayors and general managers. I've always said the Code of Conduct legislation is the dopiest legislation in Australia. Embarrassment, really, because I mean the process that I've looked at and been through, and a number of other councillors who aren't here have been through, be happy. But I'm against this because we really don't know who it is. I know John Tancred has a legal background. What about all the others? What's their legal standing? Norm Mann, a former mayor, farmer, and probably got some other business as well. So where is the legal entity? Because where it can go? Where is it? It's just it seems to be a bit of mates rates. The case may go on. We get referred to them with what goes on. I think we really need to look at who we have on this policy, not adept at Centroc, but other situations where we need people with a legal mind to be able to look at this process.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Councillor Miletto, then Councillor Whitten.
Not sure whether categorising people by occupation, saying that somebody's a farmer, doesn't necessarily say that he's not intelligent. The argument could be whatever occupations we may have. People might say, well, you're not really qualified to be councillor. That's subjective. When I look at these names, I mean, I'm assuming that these people have gone through some vetting process, and perhaps the General Manager could enlighten me there in a moment. But when I looked at the names, one thing which became apparent to me was that whoever was on the old committee also had the opportunity to be part of the Central Review Panel. And looking at these names, there's two names which stand out dramatically. So those people have taken the opportunity to be part of this new review panel, and which tells me that they're serious about what they do. I think that should be encouraged.
Thank you, Councillor Miletto. I think we actually had a question there, Councillor Whitten. Councillor Miletto did ask a question of the General Manager. Would you mind if we had that question answered first?
Of course not.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whitten. We'll come back to you.
Questions asked, were these people qualified? The answer is yes. I'd ask Mark to make some general comments.
Can I just ask you to keep your voice up because you're not flashing there, that's all.
Right.
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Yeah, right.
Flashing as in the light, that's all.
I knew what you meant, yeah. So you asked the question of whether there'd been a process of vetting and pre-qualification. The answer to that question is yes. You see some of the criteria across the top. I did suggest that Mark might be able to make further comment to assist with the discussion.
One other comment I'd draw councillors' attention to is the second last paragraph. Expected that the introduction of the new model code is coming forward in the next 2 or 3 months. At that point, as you will all be aware, a series of recommendations around how we manage this process in future. It's my intention to review the process, so we need to approve a conduct review panel now, but that will only be in place for a period of time until we can review the new model code and look at the future processes. So this is putting us into a holding pattern. Just reiterating the point made by the General Manager, Centroc does go through a process of pre-qualifying these people. They apply, they put their qualifications forward and their experience forward. They meet those qualifications and experience requirements, they're placed on the panel.
That answer your question, Councillor Miletto?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whitten.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, look, the Director has basically said what I was going to say. You look at, if you look at David Simmons, he was a federal minister. He was also he was actually chosen by state government to be an administrator in local government. You've got people. You need a mix. It's like a board. You need skills across. Most of them have probably got local government skills. Certainly, John Tancred has got legal skills. These people actually have a guideline to work within, which is a model code of conduct. Not a jury, a judge and jury. They're actually taking on board. There's only two modes in code of conduct. You've either breached or you haven't breached. Not, you know. So I support this panel, yeah, I believe that they certainly have the qualifications to convene and report back to whatever council they're reporting back to, based on the fact that whether an individual councillor has breached or they haven't breached.
Councillor Whitten. Councillor Nugent.
Yeah, I'm speaking in support of the motion. I mean, I look down that list of names. I don't know many of those people there at all. But to me, that's not really relevant. It's relevance was a process in putting this panel together, an appropriate, robust, informed process. And I trust that Central went through, did due diligence and put together a panel that met the requirements of qualified people to do this work. I do have a question though. That's quite a large panel. So if and when we get a code of conduct complaint, how do we go about choosing who from that panel investigate the complaint?
Do we have an answer
for
that
one? Who makes that decision and what is the process?
Code of conduct matters referred to the complaints coordinator, which at this point in time is myself, but would normally be the manager of corporate governance, which was previously occupied by Michelle Catlin. The process is looking at the list, selecting names. They're all pre-qualified, so they're all capable of undertaking the task based on the pre-qualification list, and then contacting a number to work out who might be available to undertake the work. Acknowledging that this list may be used by a number of other councils, and indeed members of the list may be on lists for quite a large number of councils across New South Wales, and a person is appointed. There are reviewers that have done work for the council before and who've done good jobs, and that's partly part of the process of considering the suitability of people for appointment.
Thank you very much. Is there any further questions or discussion on this item? I think we might put the motion. So the recommendation is that council drop the Centroc panel of conduct reviewers. All in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Move on to item 5.4.
Move that, Madam Chair.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy, and seconded by Councillor Whitten. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Duffy?
So I just want to, it's a fairly complex document, isn't it? You know, the 5 strategies they have in place, and I just wonder whether we have those type of strategies for our own Economic Development Committee. Does this joint Economic Development Committee, does it cost us any money?
Second part first. This is actually a strategy released by the state government. We've had quite a bit of input into it. In terms of what we might do with our strategy, we would certainly review this document going forward, and if we wanted to lift elements of this into that. However, what we do is probably at a closer degree of granularity to the broad umbrella nature of this document, so we might well become aware of other opportunities and lift them into our strategy, quite apart from what might be here. But in terms of fundamentals, there's some good information in this for us to base what we do.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Councillor Nugent.
I guess just a question. If we adopt this strategy, not a committee, if we adopt this strategy, does it have any binding control over what decisions we can and can't make? Or is it more a strategic document that helps guide our future decision making in relation to issues which may impact on the 3 councils?
Through you, Chair. Look, the document, as stated, will be used by the state government in helping it to make decisions on applications for funding which may be put forward by one or other of the councils within this document. It doesn't prevent us from adopting other strategies but specifically in the document states it will enable faster access to dedicated funding and support grant applications to the state government. So they will certainly be using it and be looking at this document for funding applications alignment to state government priorities.
Any further questions relating to this item of the REDS document, as it's colloquially known? We'll put them. Yes, Councillor Councillor Whitten.
To the director. Imagine that the state government have a regional economic development committee. They
have staff who enact it. I'd have to check any further, but it's not a.
There's no membership from.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I might note, however, that part of the recommendation of this is that an advisory committee is formed of the three councils to coordinate activities in relation to this plan, and that process, state government hasn't put forward a framework for that at this point in time, but we expect that to come forward at some.
Any further questions? We might put the motion. All in favour? Against? Motion is carried. I think that brings us to the end of the council meeting, and we will seek to move into close. So the General Manager will advise the council if any written submissions have been received relating to any item advertised for consideration by a closed meeting of Orange City Council. I extend an invitation of any member of the public present at the meeting to make a representation to council as to whether the meeting should be closed for a particular item. In accordance with the Local Government Act 1993 and the Local Government General Regulation 2005, in the opinion of the General Manager, the following business is of a kind as referred to in section 10A(2) of the Act and should be dealt with in a confidential session of the council meeting closed to the press and public.
I'm not aware of any written submissions regarding the items enclosed.
We move to closed.
I'll move that way, Madam Chair.
Sorry, thank you. It wasn't written on my list. May we have somebody move? I'm not sure. It was Councillor Whitten and seconded by Councillor Duffy. All in favour of moving into closed?
Aye.
You against? Carried.